YouTube, hello, hey, hi everybody. How's everybody doing? We've got a Friday night edition. Thank you for being patient. We were at a speaking event last night, which is a lot of stuff to talk about, I want to bet. And then just that, some of the things I mentioned, talked about last night are, I don't know if there's any single thing I talked about last night that I haven't at least talked about in some form or another before. Yes, one thing maybe. But I have to tell you, last night, I was just loaded for bear last night, and last night I put together elements of things that I've never heard anybody put together before. So I'll just kind of go over that while my mind is still fresh on it and stuff like that. That was pretty cool. By the way, before I forget, I'll post this on YouTube later on tonight. On Facebook later on tonight. Let me brighten it up a little bit here. Looking a little gloomy. What's the name of that show? Rick Moranis' character on Second City TV with the VJ, and it's, the little hand dissolve thing. He was brilliant. I think that was the best comedy sketch show ever. In fact, I'm quite sure it was. All right, so anyway, before I forget, I'll post this on Facebook for tomorrow and also Sunday. The lovely Natasha, my beautiful wife, is doing an art show. She's part of a much larger art show. She took a painting a year ago, a little over a year ago, something like that. And I guess because of her photography background, she did a lot of drawing as a kid. She just really good at it. And every time I would come home, it'd just not only be new paintings, it'd be like an entirely new style, just entirely new styles. So they're having an art show in downtown Los Angeles tomorrow, Sunday. We're going to go move some of her stuff there tomorrow night. If you happen to be in the area, and I know that's not many of you since we get people from Australia and New Zealand, although to be perfectly honest with you, if you got on the plane within the next several hours, chances are pretty good you'll be able to get here for the end of the show. So if you are one of those people in New Zealand, Australia who are watching live, or Argentina or anything, you want to hop on a jet to come to downtown LA for a couple hours, we'd love to see you. Anybody who lives closer than that, love to see you too. But it was tremendous. Dave McBooty said, "Will last night's speech be on YouTube?" Actually, yes, it will, and I will open a new page on the website called Speaking Events. I've got a number of speaking events that are already online, and I've got a bunch more that I recorded that I never just put up there. Just didn't. I have done. I don't know. There's my favorite venue is it's the main stage in Ramona, oh, by the way, for Natasha's show, I'll be there for the whole time. It's Sunday afternoon. I want to say I think it's 2 to 6 or something. I have the information and I'll post it, but I'll be there the whole time. And so if you're in the neighborhood, you want to come on down and just chat, then that'd be great too. Yeah. So my favorite venue is not the largest venue I did or done, but it's certainly my favorite, is the main stage in Ramona. If you're not familiar with California, Ramona's inland of San Diego, in a little valley, and it's basically like a little part of America, right there in California, and it's a great old stage, and I love it. I think I've been there for 10 years in a row, and I think I missed 1 year, maybe 2, but everything new that I would try out it was a January show. Every time I'd have something new for the year, I'd break it out at Ramona. And this year, there's not going to be an event because it started as a Tea Party event, and they just can't get the money together, which is a little disturbing. But then again, so there's a lot of other stuff, but we'll talk about all that too in a second. Anyway, so the art show will be there, and if you can make it, that'd be great. It's fun to watch her in the limelight, and she's had a tough time getting her photography career going. I almost said here in America, but it's because it's in Los Angeles. She does very high-end, extremely glamorous art photography, and this is not a terribly sophisticated town when it comes to style. I think from a sheer work point of view, she'd be much better suited in some place like New York, because Moscow is, in fact, an extraordinarily stylish town. That was the thing that was probably the most, wasn't exactly shocking to me. I mean, I knew Moscow wasn't, 1989 Moscow. Remember that McDonald's commercial that came out with all the Russian women doing the fashion show? And they were all dressed the same, all these big fat babushkas. Oh, very nice, you know. No. But I was not prepared for just how really stylish and astonishingly good-looking the people are in Moscow, and the incredible number of expensive cars. And I've always thought that I was the world champion of misery in a couple of areas. I thought I'd never be surpassed in terms of humidity, having spent 25 years in Miami, and I'm going to stand by that one. Humidity and mosquitoes, I don't fear anymore on account of my having, done my time in hell there. But I also thought that there was no place on earth that had worse traffic than Miami, than Los Angeles, and it turns out that apparently Moscow does, because those streets are so narrow. It's such an ancient city that there are really just everything is just gridlocked. I mean, gridlocked constantly. So we'll see. Anyway, there's that. And one quick thing before we start. As many of you know, we always do a walk-in before this, and usually it's TV shows. Tonight I was actually here, so I didn't have to put it on autopilot, and played some of my favorites, and played Beach Boys Shut Down. I played Hot Rod Lincoln, which I just adore, by Commander Cody. And I played the Time Warp again from Rocky Horror Picture Show. And when I saw that show live in 1980 in Gainesville, Florida, the midnight show, I thought I was the hippest guy in the universe. We all did. We'd never seen anything like it. And that was at the absolute peak of Crystal Method as well. Thank you. Great little kind of a sci-fi thing called High Roller that Crystal Method did. But when we saw Rocky Horror Picture Show in 1980, the movie came out to a wide release and was just generally considered a huge bomb. And the midnight movie phenomenon lasted, I don't know what the window of that was, but it was a pretty cool window. Back in the day, children, there were 3 TV networks, and you didn't get to determine your programming. There was you watched what was on. They had this tiny little book that was printed on paper with ink, and it was called TV Guide, and it could tell you what you were able to watch at any given time during the course of the next week, and that was it. Movie theaters were movie theaters. There were usually bigger screens, but 1 or 2 screens would be a big deal. None of these multiplexes. So your entertainment choices were somewhat limited. And somewhere, it must have been around I guess it was probably early 70s, somebody had the realization that movies that were running shows, at 7:30 and maybe 9 or 9:30, and then they close. And they had this realization that on Friday and Saturday nights, there were just huge numbers of people with nothing to do. I mean, there was just nothing to see, nothing to watch. There's nothing on TV. It was just nothing. There was nothing there. And so some of these theater owners, some geniuses somewhere said, why don't we just get movies that, cost us nothing and see what we bring in? I saw 2001: A Space Odyssey for the first time at midnight in, I want to say it was a Twin Gables Theater. I saw that 15 times. I saw a lot of really cool films at midnight in these movie theaters. First time I ever saw Monty Python, the guy I didn't know very well said, hey, you should come check this out. What is it? It's a British comedy group. Okay. And by the time the credits were done in the beginning of Monty Python and the Holy Grail, I thought I was going to have an aneurysm. I was laughing so hard. And they were just a packed theater. And watching Monty Python sketches on YouTube is fun, but watching them with 400 people is much, much, much funnier. I mean, when they were doing the thing about a moose bit my sister once, I thought I was going to die. I was laughing so hard. So this midnight movie thing was a thing, and then all of a sudden, along came, just as I got to college, my first year in college, they started running this thing called the Rocky Horror Picture Show. It was written by Richard O'Brien, who played a riffraff, and who I saw interviewed just a year or two ago, and he's just completely anonymous guy, just walks down the streets. I think he's a New Zealander. He's certainly either Australian or a Kiwi. And he's just a really, really cool guy, and a little older now, but you look at him and you don't think, oh, look, it's Riff Raff. Really, really interesting guy. I really liked him. And so he made this a show. I don't know if it was on Broadway. I think it was probably in London on the, what is it, wherever their Broadway equivalent, East End or something. So he made this musical called The Rocky Horror Show, and it did big business in London because it was so shocking at the time. And then he scraped together enough money to make The Rocky Horror Picture Show, which was a super low budget movie, and it starred Tim Curry as Dr. Frankenfurter. Richard O'Brien played Riff Raff. Bruce, come on, Bosley played Brad, and Susan Sarandon played Janet. Anyway, it was interesting, and it was just a straight. Meatloaf was in it. He was great. Weird stuff. Now we're surrounded by weird stuff all the time these days, all the time. Barry Bostwick, and all we see is weird now, but we don't. But we didn't see weird in 1979. I remember clearly seeing a show that was, I didn't even know what it was. I was just flipping through channels on Saturday night. I think it was the opening episode of Saturday Night Live. I didn't see the introduction to it. I just plain was switching channels. Now, I know this is going to come as a shock to younger people. For those of us who are, knocking on death's door, this will be a nostalgic memory. But I'm just flipping through channels, and I'm on NBC TV, and I see this guy doing some kind of a song or something, and he starts taking his clothes off, and he's wearing a bra and women's underwear. And it was I'm pretty sure it was Chevy Chase on Saturday Night Live, and we were just like, what? I saw David Bowie on the Midnight Special come out dressed like a butterfly or something and sing Major Tom, and I was just like, in that particular case, I wasn't bursting brain cells with like, this is really cool. I just wanted to kill him, It's like, this isn't funny. This isn't a joke. This astronomy, this Apollo thing. This astronaut thing's not a joke. I was very angry. That's what grown up's all about. So anyway, we did the walk-in show for just tonight. We ran the dance number at the beginning, near the beginning of Rocky Horror Picture Show called Time Warp. The dance called the Time Warp, and it was set in Frankenfurter's castle. Dr. Frankenfurter get it, and he had this weird cast of like party guests, and those party guests were really creepy. They reminded me an awful lot of like the party guests in The Shining. So it was just a super campy thing. And when you first saw Tim Curry come down out of this elevator, and he's, I don't know how tall he is in real life. In the movie theater, he looked like he's 6'3" or something, young guy, and he comes up with this outrageous makeup, this tons of mascara, super red lipstick. He's wearing like fishnet stockings and a corset, and he comes out of there and does this pouty thing, and we're just sitting there. And when you're in college, there was a time, and this is really going to date me, there was a time when you went to college to have new experiences that you'd never seen before, and this is what you were looking for. You were looking for something that was just absolutely shocking. And we didn't cry. That's the thing. When Tim Curry came out of there and out of that elevator, we didn't all cry, and we didn't all, try to get the show closed because we didn't, it wasn't something we were comfortable with. We couldn't believe it. And my memory of it is that every single person that I knew in college, when we saw Tim Curry, we'd never seen anything like this before. We'd never seen Men in Drag before. We're just, all-American kids who grew up in the 70s. I graduated in 77. About a week before we graduated, the group of us that were making films, Super 8 movies back in the day, my friend Fritz and Steve and a bunch of others, and there was a guy who was really smart guy for his age named Lee Kolosna. We were sitting outside I think in Charlie's van. He had one of those, converted vans that were just basically a pickup van. Then you send it to a shop, and then the whole interior's got this sound system that'll blow the windows out, and you got blue shag carpetings on the walls and these swiveling captain's chairs. That was a thing for a while. We're sitting in Charlie Allen's van driving around, and Lee Kolosna said, out of the blue, he said, "You do realize," this would be 77. He said, "You guys all do realize that we are growing up in the most boring period in American history. You all get that, right?" "What?" He said, "Yeah, this is by far, this is the most boring, safest period in American history. There's never been anything like it. Well, what do you mean? He says, what do you mean what I mean? We got in a war. We're not going to Vietnam. Listen to our music. Debbie Gibson has the #1 rock and roll song in America. You know, everything is vanilla. Everything's just so bland. I remember being really shocked at that. He's absolutely right. So anyway, here's the thing. So we saw Rocky Horror. Here's a political message because this is the political show, not the entertainment show. Stratosphere Studio. So we saw Tim Curry come down and do his whole thing. We all just loved him, and we loved. The show was weird, and and there was like, all kinds of things that at the time were a little disturbing. There was kind of a homosexual element to it with not really sure what Brad is doing. Janet is fooling around with Rocky Horror and or with Frankenfurter. It's all just this weird sexual stuff that at the time was just like, what? But we just loved it, and I remember being so shocked. Camp, thank you very much, Mobile Moto. Camp is the word. Camp is a form of comedy, and I'll talk about that in a second. But we were completely stunned, but we were totally cool with it. We just thought it was. Did I say you light up my life or whatever it was? Yeah, and at the same time we were still just completely shocked, and the idea that Frankenfurter would be an elementary school teacher 40 years later. It just doesn't make it just was not possible to conceive that there would be more than one of them. And this is kind of the political point, And the offensive tranny, who I like very, very much, a really, really remarkable individual who's a genuine transsexual person who was born a woman and went through 2 years of transition to become a man, comes off as male, not a particularly intimidating male, but definitely comes off as male. And she, first time I ever saw, his show, because this person has earned the respect of the pronouns that they prefer. Basically, first time I ever just flipped onto Marcus, I think his name is. Marcus's channel was, the first thing I heard out of his mouth is, look, I'm a genuine transsexual person. I'm genuinely trans, and I'm trans because I have mental illness. I have gender dysphoria. I had to spend years and years and years in therapy, and then for 2 years while I was doing this transition, I never left the house because I didn't want anybody to perceive me as a woman. I didn't go outside of the house, forget going to the other bathroom, for 2 years until I felt comfortably enough that people wouldn't stare at me and think, what is that thing? So Marcus has enormous respect for me because he's a man of integrity, and also he's completely sane. Anytime you get anybody talking seriously and realistically and honestly and professionally and mostly logically about their mental illness, that person's got a pretty good handle on sanity. And so here's the whole point of the Rocky Horror thing. What he was saying is about, and forget Dylan Mulvaney, because Dylan Mulvaney is a completely unique case. Dylan Mulvaney is just a desperate attention whore and is just would have done anything. If Dylan Mulvaney thought that he could have been famous by being the straightest, butchest lumberjack ever, that's the way he would have gone. He's just after fame and nothing else. So he doesn't count. But when you get all of these guys with green-dyed beards and they're wearing all this mascara and they demand to be called she and they demand to be able to use women's restrooms, this whole transgender nonsense, what Marcus said was, and I realized this when I was watching Rocky Horror Picture Show, Frankenfurter, this drag queen, was never, ever a transsexual. He was a transvestite. He never pretended to be a woman. He was a man who liked to dress like a woman. And that was just so okay, It was just so okay. You're a man who wants to dress up like a woman. Fantastic. That's great. You be you, you do you, I'll do me. We were fine with this. And when I say we were fine with this, we were the kind of people, for this thing was just like a knock in the jaw kind of strange. We just thought, fantastic, that's great, super. But Frankenfurter's character didn't come down the stairs and demand at the beginning of the show that we all agree that he was actually a woman. He was just a guy who liked to dress up like women and that's what drag was. Now, these people are demanding that you not only change your language for them, but that you change your entire reality matrix. And it's just so offensive. And this is the point. It's so unnecessary to me. Marcus says that what's the problem, you know? You're a feminine man. You're a male. You're a biological male. You like to dress up like women. You like to wear makeup, and you like to do. Okay, great. Knock yourself out. Don't ask me to believe in your validating your mental illness. He said, just we don't owe you that. But then I look around and I say, hey, yeah, Frankenfurter is mild compared to the creatures that are teaching our kids today. And I just thought that was worth mentioning because my show, I can mention whatever I want to. So here's what I talked about last night. Actually, very proud of this. We are still knocking the bugs out of the website, just getting it up and running and stuff. There's a lot of formatting issues. For 4 days, I had no control over the formatting. I've got it back now. WordPress and Elementor, which is a kind of a subset of WordPress for, designing websites. I didn't know anything about, and I've had to learn all about. I got a number of great comments from the beta testers. I've got a list here which is superb, and I don't want you to single anyone out because we got so much help from this. But this is from Steve Young, and it's just a list of items on the website that either need to be fixed or not what they should be. So we're working on those slowly. But the thing about the website that I was so excited about was all the new episodes. Major Mace Mattingly, Story Mechanics. We got things to come. It's taken almost 3 months to get the website working, and we're very close to having it finished. I've been working with Natasha for this art show that's coming up, and then that'll be over, and we'll over the weekend I should get the rest of these things knocked out, at which point I can go ahead and start doing some of the content that I've been promising that I thought would take a week to get the website going, because that's what they told me, but that was 7 or 8 weeks ago now. Anyway, here we go. So we talked a lot about Story Mechanics, talked a lot about Major Mace Mattingly. The thing I haven't talked about in a whole lot of detail is the Things to Come series, because that's going to be the signature political stuff. And I've said before on this show that it's going to be very much like the virtual presidency. It's going to be a series of videos that are related to each other about essentially a single topic looked at from a number of different ways, and will be internally consistent and branded and all the rest of it. So I mentioned at a speaking event last night, I had done, in 2013, right after I did the speech about Trump being the next, 3 days after Romney lost in 2012, I predicted that the next president of the United States was going to be a Republican, and he was going to come from the pop culture. It wasn't going to be anybody who'd ever been elected before. This is early November of 2012. This is 2-3 years before Trump even announced. I didn't call Trump. I just said whoever it's going to be is going to be a Republican. They're not going to be somebody who's ever held elected office before. And the one thing that they're absolutely going to have is they're going to come from the pop culture, because the only people that will be able to get elected against this headwind is going to be somebody who understands the media and how to use the media against them. And turns out I was pretty much right about that. When I was thinking about what's happening to the country, and I just plain went insane for several months after 2020 election. I was just so stunned and shocked, and then COVID and all the rest of it. It took me a long time to sit down and figure it out. And then a member here on the Stratosphere Lounge said, Bill, you should not be thinking about current solutions to upcoming problems. They're going to be fifth generation problems, and the solutions are going to be completely different than what you think they are. And that just unlocked a thing in my head. Told me about this book called The Fourth Turning, which I have talked about many times on this. So I talked about The Fourth Turning, and I've only in 2013, right after that speech where I picked Trump, I think I went out 25 out of the first 26 weeks of 2013. I was on the road doing speaking events. And this year, I've done 4. And I mean all 2023. The last 3 I did were versions of this thing to come thing, which I put together and really raised some money for us, which really saved the day for us. And so I decided that things to come was going to be the next sort of thing I was going to just really pay a lot of attention to. So last night I got a chance to do my 3rd live speaking event on the things to come topic, but last night I had a chance to do something that I have not had a chance to do in the previous 2, and that is I had a chance to really give this thing some thought, and I impressed myself last night. Turns out that it was done at the American Freedom Alliance event, so they have top quality video, and we're going to post that the second I get it. Because when I'm on my game, I'm pretty good. Last night I was on fire. So this is all the political stuff. So what I did last night for the first time ever was I was able to I was looking for evidence. So my theory on things to come is that I believe that the guys who wrote this book, The Fourth Turning, are correct. They've convinced me that history is cyclical and these cycles are considerably shorter than I thought they were. They've convinced me through compelling evidence that I will lay out in the first of these scripted episodes. Things to come is not going to be like Moving Back to America. It's going to be like Firewalls. They're going to be completely scripted. And the first one's called The Theory, and I'm going to just explain what this fourth turning theory is. But basically what they said is that there's an 80-year cycle in history, and the Romans called it the seculum. That's where we get the word secular from. It basically means the human lifespan. The average human lifespan has risen enormously since, ancient Greece, spectacularly. But the average old person is still 80, 85 years old when they kick off. That hasn't changed too much. And so these two historians and psychologists looked at human history and were able to detect a remarkably precise pattern of more or less 80-year cycles. And I talked about that. And I've talked about that before, and I talked about it last night. But the thing to me always that was missing was, okay, so we start this clock of this 80-year cycle, and the clock starts with an existential crisis to the society. And just to clarify, World War I for America was no fun, and neither was Vietnam, but neither one of those were an existential threat to America, but World War II was. And so to very, very simplify this thing, basically, if you look at American history in 80-year cycles, Declaration of Independence was signed in 1776, but it was fought mostly during the 1780s. So you take the 1780s and you add 80 years and you get the 1860s, which is the Civil War. Take the 1860s and add 80 years and you get the 1940s, which is World War II. You take the 1940s and add 80 years and you get the 2020s. So here we are. Once I bought a belief in this theory, thank you, Sad Wings, I'll get to that in a second. I don't want to lose my thought here. Once I began to think that there was something to this theory, and clearly the theory was predicting that we are now at the point where an existential crisis is upon us. It's no longer like coming, it's here. So these are some of the new nuances I put in last night. One thing that's interesting about the previous three crises, the 1780s, the 1860s, and the 1940s, was that for at least 20 years prior to the actual crisis, it was plainly obvious to everybody that something was going to happen, and we knew what it was. This is a breakthrough thought for me. For the 20 years prior to the War of Independence, we knew that sooner or later we were going to have this fight. We didn't want it. We tried to avoid it. We thought we could avoid it, but we knew that was going to be the issue. For the 20 years prior to the Civil War, we knew that this was coming to a head in the Great Compromise and all the rest of it. We could see it coming for 20 years, and everybody knew it. And the same thing for World War II. Right after World War I and Hitler comes to power and the Japanese start rearming, we had 10, 15 years of warning, and it's not like, and we tried to avoid it. It's not like we thought, hey, we can stave it off. And when it hit us, we were surprised in every one of those cases, but we weren't. We were shocked at the sneak attack kind of thing of it. We're shocked at the, at the Lexington and Concord. We were shocked at the firing of Fort Sumter, but nobody was surprised. Oh my gosh, wow, we're going to fight the British. Everybody knew it was coming. And so I thought that was really, really important. So I sat down and using that sense that, okay, you've got 10 or 15, maybe 20 years of indications of what something is going wrong with society, and it's going to come to a head. And so I said, well, if this theory is correct, then let's look at where we are right now. Is it going to be a war? I do not believe it is going to be a war at all. I don't see that China or Russia or all of them combined have any chance. I'm not saying there's not going to be armed conflict. And I'm not even saying there's not going to be the possibility of nuclear weapons. I'm saying that it is impossible to me, having done the Cold War series where the stakes were so high and the pressures were so great, the idea of nuclear war with full-out nuclear war the United States is involved in, I think is just off the table. You can disagree with that, you're welcome to, but given the number of times that this trigger could have been pulled during the Cold War and wasn't pulled, I'm utterly convinced that it's not going to be that. Likewise, despite what many people think, I'm utterly convinced it's not going to be a civil war either, in the sense that we understand it anyway. The Civil War happened because there were battle lines. And the battle lines in the Civil War were more or less the Mason-Dixon line. Most of the people who lived south of that line in the states of the Confederacy, especially the Deep Confederacy, the first 7 states to leave the Union. 7, I think, yeah. Those were pro-slavery states, had been from the founding, had been aware that there was a crisis from the constitutional founding, that this slavery thing was not going over well with the North. And most of the people who were anti-slavery lived in the North, and I bet you probably most of the people in both regions didn't have a particularly strong passion about it either way. The Southerners used to say, the Southerners, the Confederates, when they were talking about this war, said, rich man's war, poor man's fight. But the reason you could have a civil war was because on one side of this line was a gray army of Confederates who were all fighting for slavery, and on the other side of the line was a blue army of Union troops who, at the beginning anyway, were mostly fighting to keep the country together, but rapidly this thing turned into an anti-slavery crusade, and that's what it became. And if you think that there's going to be a civil war like that, if you look at California, for example, the last election, take the bluest of the blue states, like this one, for example, 3 out of 10 people that live here voted for Trump. And probably 1 out of 4 people in Los Angeles did, whether they admit it or not. The largest single concentration of Republicans in the world in terms of an organization is the Los Angeles County Republican group. So civil war is not possible in the way that we understand it, and not just because of the fact that we're so blended together. It's also because of something what I call the Rubik's Cube effect, and that is that you can say, oh, those damn Democrats or those damn Republicans, and that's, we're going to kill all these guys, we're going to fight them, we're going to get our guns and blah, 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 blah. Okay. But if you go to a football game and you're a Packers fan and you're watching them play the Bears, you're sitting next to 2 or 3 other Packers fans on either side of you, behind you, and in front of you, and you don't know those people's politics and you don't care. You're all dressed in yellow and green, and across the way are the goddamn Chicago Bears, and they're all dressed in black and red, and that Rubik's Cube of alliances has shifted, and it's no longer Republicans versus Democrats, now it's Packers versus Bears. And that didn't happen in the Civil War. It was impossible to happen in the Civil War. It's impossible for that kind of thing to happen in World War I, for example. You didn't have French and Germans going to the same supermarkets, listening to the same TV shows, sitting there going to the same sporting events, and just rubbing shoulders, but it just didn't happen. So I don't think that's going to be it either. So I decided, now Mobile Moto says we've been in a civil war. We have been in a cultural war, but we're not in a shooting civil war. That's what I'm talking about. I should have been more specific. And we're not going to be. That's not going to happen. It's not. So I came to the conclusion that the one thing that everybody could see was happening all over the place, hi to everybody, by the way, that everybody could agree on was that the rule of law was eroding, and that it was eroding slowly at first and then very quickly. It really started with the Clintons. Barack Obama put the thing into overdrive. The federal government usually when society's falling, always, the, the fish rots from the head down, the Russians say, and they ought to know. And it's always been the elites that get bored and just sell out. So the rule of law has been destroyed at the highest levels by people like Hillary Clinton. And then when you own the Justice Department, we discovered that if you can own the Justice Department, it doesn't matter that you have a press or not. It doesn't matter how much evidence you have. You can have all the evidence in the world. If the Justice Department decides not to prosecute, we get away with literally murder. And I don't use the word literally too often, literally, but that's what we saw. We saw a person murdered in front of all of our eyes in a jail cell. And we were told that the TV cameras that were covering this event they just stopped working for 13 minutes. And then they started working again. And during that time, I guess he just hanged himself. And that was the official explanation, and we all ate it. We all knew they were lying, but we all ate it. Because what could we do about it? So all the way down the line, what I've seen more and more of is the destruction of law and order as an idea. And that's what leads me to believe that the next existential crisis, which is upon us already, is going to be the battle between the law-abiding and the lawless in this country and around the world. And parenthetically, you'd be hard-pressed to find a more high contrast example of what I'm talking about than what Hamas did to Israel back on October 7th. That is precisely what I'm talking about. That's a war between barbarism and civilization. And I'm not going to be concerned about Israel or any other countries. I'm not going to talk about Ukraine or anything else. I'm just talking about the United States. We are facing an oncoming epidemic of lawlessness, and essentially we're facing a yellow fever pandemic of mental illness. It's not a physical pandemic that's coming, although the physical pandemic that we just got out of contributed greatly to the setting the stage for this. We're going to be facing a mental health pandemic. We're going to have half the country essentially broken, and these broken people are going to disturb society in such a dramatic way that it is going to be an existential crisis and will trigger this entire sequence of events and so on. That is just another time running around the cycle. So that was where I was before I did the thing last night. And what I came to realize was, okay, two things stand out here. First of all, Bill, that's just your opinion. And everybody has an opinion. If you're ever good at anything, Billy, my lad, you can make a case, you can put some evidence on the table. So I needed some evidence. I needed something that's not just an opinion and not just these writers' opinion. I wanted some evidence. And the second thing that struck me, and this is what gave me the lead to the key to this whole thing, is, according to this fourth turning theory of these 80-year cycles, it's an 80-year cycle divided into quarters. Every 20 years is what we would call a generation. People never used the term generations before, I don't know, maybe 100 years ago. But these researchers went back and could pinpoint where this is this generation, and names for all of them. And the thing about this theory that kept bothering me was, it's awfully convenient that this existential crisis shows up every 80 years, right? I mean, it's kind of convenient, don't you think? If this is an 80-year cycle, and the 80-year cycle is caused by an existential crisis, and you're right about 1780, 1860, 1940, 2020, yes, the evidence that this kind of thing is acting is compelling. In fact, it's overwhelming. But what brings this crisis around? And this is when I had my real breakthrough. And I think I got it clear last night. I don't know if I can remember exactly what I said, but the crisis is not random, the crisis is not accidental, and the crisis is not external. The crisis arrives every 80 years because changes in our biology as a species bring it about. That was when I really felt like I'm onto something. John Pershing says, there's always a crisis, it's only in certain times that it turns into a serious issue. There's always an issue, John. I don't mean to split hairs with you, but it's important to get these definitions right. Existential crisis is what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about things like, even 9/11 wasn't really an it wasn't an existential threat to this country. So here we go. So once I realized that it could not be coincidence, that these crises were not external things, because there's no way to explain the theory that way. It's not like these are meteors that hit the Earth every 80 years. Something's happening every 80 years. I'm convinced of that. So whatever it is the cycle creates its own crisis. It gives you 20 years as things are falling apart to show you where whatever the weakest seam is in society at that given point, and that just starts to spread wider and wider, and that's where the fault is going to be. That's where the quake's going to be. And so that was a big breakthrough for me. And then I started putting together things that I'd heard about and talked about many, many times before on the show. And then I did a lot of thinking about this before I did the event last night, but I always write the notes of what I'm going to say at the table 20 minutes before I go on. I never, ever prepare any more than that in advance. I want to do it just before I go on, so it's fresh in my mind. I talk for an hour and a half. I usually use 8 or 9 index cards for that. So what I got to last night was I was looking for biological evidence that this fourth turning theory was correct. I figured if I could find biological evidence that it was correct, then I'd have a case rather than just an opinion. So the conclusion I came to last night was, and you'll get to see all of this, because I should have the footage in a couple days. But basically, I started off by talking about fourth turning, as I've just done now, and I basically said, I can tell you what's going to happen. It'll take me 10 minutes for me to prove to you why I think this is going to happen. It's going to take me a little longer. So then I said, okay, and we'll do this right now for our people who are watching live. Let's do a real quick, now if you know the answers to this, because I've used this before, then just be quiet, please. In fact, I'm not going to wait for answers in the comment stream. But talking to this audience live, I said, so let's just stop for a second, because this is all about humans. Let's talk about humans. And how do we compare to other animals? Where are we in relationship to other animals? So let's talk about zoology. Let's talk about other animals for a second. So quick zoology quiz for those of you out there in the audience. What is the fastest land animal? Cheetah. Yes, that's right, cheetah. What's the highest flying animal? Somebody said an eagle or a hawk. I believe it's a kind of a falcon is the highest flying animal. What's the deepest diving animal? Whales. Yes, specifically sperm whales. Correct. What animal lives in the hottest, in the coldest climate? Penguins, polar bears. Okay. What animal lives in the hottest climate? Snakes, insects, scorpions. Okay, good. What animal is most violent when confined in small groups, large groups of animals in one small space? Humans. Interesting, I said yes. What animal is least violent when confined into small spaces, large groups of them into a small space? Rabbits or something. Okay, good. So we went through these things, and I said, these are all correct answers, and you're wrong about all of them. Humans. The answer is humans. All of them are humans. That's the answer for every one of them. The fastest land animal is the human. It's 700-800 miles an hour now. The highest flying animal is human. The deepest diving animal are the humans. The animal that lives in the hottest climate are the humans. The animals that live in the coldest climate are the humans. The animals that are most violent when confined in a small space are humans. And the animals that are least violent when confined into small space are humans. I was talking about college earlier. I was in a sociology class in 81, maybe. I was a student at the University of Florida. It was one of those giant classrooms, 400 people classrooms. The lecturer was up there. He was anthropology class. And somebody was talking about humans as the killer apes. We're the only ones that murder, and just how horrible we are. This is when the whole thing was really just starting. And this guy said something I never forgot. He said, really? He said, yeah, this kid was saying, we're just horrible. We're a cancer on the planet. This is the beginning of this thing. It's just common belief now. And he looked at this guy and he said, let me tell you something here. If you were to take, there's 400 of you in here now. He said, if you were to take 400 animals of any species whatsoever, and pack them into a space as tight as you are packed in now, in an hour, there will be one of them left and a lot of blood on the floor. And I just went, that's absolutely true. It's absolutely right. We are the most violent and the least violent species. And the reason I bring all this stuff up is because that is what humans are. We are the most adaptable species, not only alive today, that's ever lived. In fact, I personally believe that we are the most adaptable species that is conceivable to believe. And one of the reasons that I believe this is we are so adaptable because one of the many reasons that we're so adaptable is because, and we can live in all these environments, is because we humans eat everything. Koalas, for example, have one food source, and that's eucalyptus leaves. That's the only thing that they eat. That's all. Dogs are carnivores, so are cats. They don't munch on kale. Humans eat everything. There's nothing on this planet that is alive that we do not eat. We eat birds, we eat mammals, we eat reptiles, we eat fish, we eat insects, we eat fungus, we eat grasses of various kinds, we eat leaves, we eat roots, we eat berries, we eat everything that is possible to get biological energy out of. Humans will have eaten it at some point or another, Lord Biosis, except for eucalyptus. And I'll be willing to bet you if we got hungry enough, you probably could also chew on some eucalyptus. People, when they're starving, will eat their shoes. Humans eat anything and everything. And people think, well, what's the big deal? I never really thought about it. It's enormous. It's an enormous deal. It's an enormous deal. Think about it. There's no other animal on Earth that eats everything. No other animal on Earth eats everything. Raccoons are a great example of omnivores. And I'm not saying that raccoons wouldn't eat truffles if they could find them, but they don't. We're the only ones that do. So this is the chain of evidence that I'm trying to create here. So we are the most adaptable animals on the planet. In the history of the planet, nothing else comes close, and nothing else is conceivable to come closer than what we are and what we do. Which means that because we are so adaptable and because we live in so many different kinds of environments, in order for us to survive as a species, we have to be psychologically adaptable as well. We can't just have our bodies conform to the environment. We have to have our minds conform to the environment because we are essentially naked apes. And if we didn't have the brain up here, we couldn't live in any of those environments. We couldn't even live in the environment we grew up with. We'd be just easy pickings for any large cat. We can't climb like monkeys. We've got no teeth. We've got no claws. No, we're just defenseless pink yard apes, except for this. And because of this, we can do anything and go anywhere and eat everything and so on. So we are the master adapters, is what we are. And this leads me to my next step in this chain of evidence. We are so adaptable psychologically that we are capable of doing things that other animals cannot do. And that, what I mean by that is we are capable of changing our psychology and our strategies almost on an instinctive level. There are very few human instincts, by the way. There are a few, but very few. We are so programmable that we can change what other animals cannot change, that they're hardwired to do. So get out your drinking glasses for those of you who've been longtime fans of the Stress Free Lounge, because it's RK time. We are so astonishingly adaptable that we are able to change our evolutionary strategy, which is hardwired into every other species on the planet. We can change this. We're not aware of it, but we can change this. That's how adaptable we are. So, where's the evidence for that? When they tried to do a study on how much, what would be the maximal, scientists were looking to figure out what would be the maximal population of animals, of animal X, in any given environment? How would you be able to tell what is the carrying capacity of the land? How much life can a particular environment support? Maybe it's an acre, maybe it's 100 square acres, maybe it's 100 square miles, maybe it's a continent, who knows? A specific area, how much life can it support? And what they realized was that this was predicated on a couple of different things, and that one of the things it was predicated on, the primary thing it was predicated on, was the availability of resources, the availability of food. And that depending on how available food was, different species would take different strategies of behavior to maximize their chance of survival in that particular environment. And most animals are generally considered more or less the mixes, but there are outliers on the extreme. We're going to talk to the extremes because the extremes are where we can see the most clear distinction. So let's talk about the two different extremes for strategy survival as a species. One of them is rabbits. Rabbits use a theory that these scientists have called the R theory, R/K. The R theory says that your best chance of passing on your genes and succeeding as a species, evolutionarily succeeding, is through R, which means reproductive rate. So, rabbits are a great example of an R-type species. When there is a great deal of food, rabbits are in their perfect element. So let's just take an imaginary example just for the sake of clarity. Let's imagine a field that's 100 miles square and it is filled with nothing but fresh alfalfa, just clover. It's just a gigantic field of clover, okay? A field of clover. If we put rabbits into an endless field of clover, what can we expect to happen? Well, first of all, everybody knows that the thing about rabbits is they breed like rabbits. Rabbits and by the way, pigs are the most successful, reproductively successful large mammals, but rabbits are a little cleaner example. If you have an endless field of clover and you put two rabbits in there very quickly, you're going to have a lot of rabbits. And this is the point. It's in the interest of the rabbit species to have as many kids as possible and as quickly as possible. Rabbits don't spend time teaching their young how to be rabbits, and the reason is because it doesn't take an awful lot of training to go out and eat clover if you're a rabbit. If rabbits were to dedicate time as a species to improving the survival skills of their children, then rabbits would be wasting time. Because if you are trying to make a better rabbit, you're going to lose to the rabbits that are just making more rabbits, because a better rabbit doesn't have any more chance of surviving than a non-better rabbit does in an endless field of clover. Everybody understand that? If you've got an endless field of clover with rabbits in it, and you get one group of rabbits that decide we're going to have much fewer rabbits and we're going to make them highly competitive rabbits, we're going to train them, you gain nothing. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. They will do as well as the untrained rabbits, and there will be fewer of them because you've wasted more time teaching them how to do things that they don't need to be taught how to do. So, rabbits are a great example of an R-type species. So, what's an example of a K-type species? Well, if you want to go to the end of the spectrum apart from an endless field of clover, where R is not only strongly selected, it's the only choice. Go to the other extreme, you have to go to an environment where there's very little food. And then, when you find there's very little food, you find that K-type strategies for survival predominate. Rabbits are R-type, and their survival strategy is quantity, because the food is very available. You don't have to be a specially trained rabbit. On the other extreme, when you're in a low food resource environment, the K strategy is not quantity, it's quality. And a great example of a K-selected species is the wolf. So, if wolves were to apply the R strategy to a low food environment, like let's say up in the Rocky Mountains or something, and wolves had, a litter of 12 puppies every 3 or 4 months, you're just going to create a lot of dead wolves. There's not enough food for them. they're all going to die out. It's not going to work. Works great for rabbits, but it's not going to work for wolves because there's not enough food up there. There's very little food up there. So what wolves need to do in order to survive is wolves need to have very few children, and they need to spend a great deal of time and effort, years and years, teaching their young how to be effective hunters. Because if they're not effective hunters, they're going to starve. They're going to die. They have to learn how to be very effective hunters, working together and cooperating as wolves do and so on, because there's so little food there that if you're not a very, very good hunter, you're just going to die. And so wolves are a perfect example of a K-type selected species. So everybody gets that, right? That's pretty clear. So what does it have to do with humans? Well, humans, in my opinion, again, none of these ideas are originally mine, but the synthesis is mine. Human adaptability means that we are capable of rewiring ourselves as a species or as a community without even being aware of it. When conditions favor abundance, we will tend towards an R-type strategy for survival. When conditions favor scarcity, we will automatically adapt to a K-type survival strategy. And we can see this in our behaviors. So what can we say about rabbits and wolves as it applies to humans? Well, one example about rabbits is rabbits don't give a damn about other rabbits. Rabbits are not territorial animals at all. Why would they be? There's no reason for a rabbit in a field of clover to be territorial. If you've got 100 rabbits in a field of clover and somebody dumps 200 more rabbits right on top of them, then everybody just moves over. There's no fighting for territory among rabbits. Food is abundant. They don't care. It doesn't matter to them. It doesn't matter how many strangers come in. It doesn't matter how many aliens come in. Rabbits cannot see other rabbits as a threat. They're not wired for it. They don't need it. They don't need it. There's all the food that they need for everybody, and so rabbits don't perceive other rabbits to be a threat because they just move over and just keep eating. Now, wolves, on the other hand, if you introduce 2 packs of wolves to the same territory, one of them is going to end up killing the other one because the land will not support 2 packs of wolves in the same area. What does that mean in terms of humans? Well, wolves are territorial. If strangers, alien wolves, other wolves come into our territory, we don't like it, and we will fight them. And we know we have to fight them because if we don't fight them, we are all going to die. It's us or them in a situation like that. That's what we're wired for. We're wired for competition. We're wired for conflict. Wolves look at play as a learning experience, and wolf children play with each other a lot because it's sharpening their survival skills, teaching them how to jump and bite and rabbit children don't play with each other. You've never seen 2 baby rabbits playing with each other. You see wolf puppies playing all the time. It's all they do. So play is an area for young K species to develop the skills necessary to become decent hunters. And furthermore, it does 2 other things. It is a simulation of hunting, and more importantly than that, it shows the wolves who is who relative to those inside their own closed society. Play is a way for a K-type species to determine hierarchies. And hierarchies are what define a K-type species. There are no rabbit hierarchies. There's no alpha rabbit. There's no need for an alpha rabbit. There are no small group of rabbits that do all the mating. It doesn't matter. They just make as many rabbits as you can. Now, wolves, on the other hand, do have a great deal of hierarchies, and because wolves are carnivores and because wolves are predators, wolves also have something that rabbits do not have, and that is a highly sophisticated social structure and a number, this is really important, so listen carefully. Wolves also have a number of hardwired, instinctive restraints on behavior that rabbits do not have. When 2 wolves are fighting for dominance, when one wolf surrenders, he will put his head up and show his throat to the other wolf, which means basically saying, okay, I lose, you can kill me. Now, what's interesting about that is that when a wolf shows his throat to the other wolf, the wolf that's been fighting him tooth and claw doesn't rip his throat out. The second that one subordinate wolf surrenders, sends a surrender signal, I give up, the aggression on the part of the other wolf shuts down. It just stops. Period. It's over. The wolf doesn't tear his throat out, and the wolf doesn't spend the next 20 years saying he's going to get revenge either. It's a simple understanding. I thought I was better than you. I thought I was better than you. Nope, turns out you won. I show you my throat. You're at top of me. Now I know where I am in the eating order, the pecking order, and all the rest of it. And so wolves have developed rules of conduct that we would refer to as rules of honor. They have standards of conduct that they have to adhere to because they're dangerous animals. And if they don't have these standards of conduct, they'll kill each other. Rabbits don't have to worry about being killed by other rabbits. So these are what case and R type species do out there in the wild. And I believe that humans are the most adaptable animals in the world. I think I can prove that. And I believe there's a great deal of evidence to say that humans adapt to different situations and exhibit either R-type behaviors or K-type behaviors. And we are so unaware of these things that we don't understand that they're even operating. But if you think about it, wolves and K-type creatures are precisely what American conservatives are, and rabbits and R-type creatures are precisely what human progressives are. And I'll give you some examples. Progressives are in favor of things like socialism and the equal sharing of resources. They are in favor of these things because they are not competitors. They don't compete. They don't know how to compete. Rabbits don't compete. Rabbits don't even understand what competition is. However, if you put rabbits in a room full of animals that do compete, the rabbits will be quickly out of business, and they're aware of that. And so humans who have R-type strategy behaviors don't like competition. They don't like play. They don't like capitalism. They don't like freedom, because freedom means you can do as well or as poorly as you are either born to do or as you choose to do based on how much work you do. They're not interested in this. They want everything to be equal because it suits them, because they're not competitors. Wolves, on the other hand, look at that situation and say, this isn't fair. Rabbits look at competition and say it's not fair that the strongest ones get more, or strongest isn't the word I'm looking for, the most competent ones get more because they work harder. They think that's not fair. Wolves think it's unfair that everybody gets an equal share when not everybody does the equal amount of work. They're both right. It depends on how you are interested in equality of outcome or equality of opportunity. And on we go. Conservatives have a very highly attuned sense of territory and risk from the other, because we've seen that humans are apex predators, and that hasn't gone away. Conservatives understand that if we want to live a happy, free life, we'd better be prepared to defend ourselves, because there are other humans out there that want our stuff, and they will try to take it. And the only way you can stop this is by being so strong that they don't think the game is worth the candle. Liberals cannot understand this. And when I say they cannot understand it, I don't mean that they refuse to understand it. I mean they don't have the synapses. They don't have the wiring to understand this. This has been proven by brain study biology. Liberals are not capable of detecting threats on the same degree as conservative brains are. And this has been proven again and again and again. Now, liberals say that conservatives are governed by fear. You're just constricted by fear. Okay, I can see how it looks that way from a liberal point of view. From a conservative point of view, liberals are not only naive, they're suicidally naive, and they want to bring that naivete onto the rest of us so that they can feel better about themselves. Because ultimately, you see, the wolves and the K-type creatures are competitors, and the Rs aren't. And when you have humans who are both Ks and Rs, the Rs understand that they'd better put some restrictions on the Ks, because if they don't, the Ks are going to win this game. And so this is why they get together in large numbers, and the Ks agree to be governed by the Rs because it's done in a way that up until very recently was considered to be honorable, namely through the force of free and fair elections. And when the Rs realized that they could keep the Ks in check by appealing to their honor code, which is wired into us, then they began to realize that since they don't have an honor code like that, they can manipulate honor and decency and restraint and all of these other behavioral inhibitors that Ks have. They can manipulate that and get the results that they want over the Ks, and in that sense the Ks are powerless, because we're powerless due to our own respect for order, law, hierarchy, honor, all the rest of it. All right? So far, so good. Yes? This makes sense to me. Now, let's go back to the basic premise of this, because this is not up for discussion. This arcade, whether it applies to humans is up for discussion, but arcade in the world is not up for discussion. So why do these cycles come every 80 years? What's happening? My theory is that whenever there's an existential crisis, it creates so much social trauma that it swings huge numbers of the extant population into Ks. They have to be Ks, because now they're fighting for your life. You're fighting for your society's life, and you no longer have the luxury of pretending that the other doesn't pose a threat to you anymore. You are now being bombed on a daily basis, or your base is attacked by Japanese airplanes, or the Ks from Hitler are rolling over your villages and so on. When that existential crisis comes, the whole society becomes strongly K. Strongly K. Has to. Because if it remained R, it would die out. Humans are adaptable. Former peaceniks become forced to become warriors when it's finally clear to them, through the arrival of a crisis, that it's either change your behavior or die. Now, some of them won't change their behavior, and those people are they're just incurably naive. They're fatally naive. And so this is what gave me the key to this thing actually making sense. A crisis occurs. This existential crisis to the human society forces these ever adaptable human animals to move strongly towards K-type behavior. Honor-based, rule of law, respect for institutions, respect for authority, honesty between each other, competition, capitalism, effort, equal reward. All of these are K behaviors. And once that happens, that society will survive, because K-type humans are simply unbeatable. There's nothing on planet that can stop K-selected humans. They're the ultimate apex predator. And if you have a miraculous society like this one, predicated on an awareness of our problems and our limitations, you create a government that's built to stop these built to put these aggressive tendencies into a very narrow box, you end up with America and not Nazi Germany. So, crisis comes, the whole society goes K. The generation after the crisis generation, which would be my generation, my dad was greatest generation. He went through the crisis. He lived through World War II. He got to Germany in April of 45, about 3 weeks before the war ended. He never saw combat, never claimed to see combat, but he did expect he was going to die fighting for his country, and if the atomic bombs had not come along, he very likely would have, in Japan instead of in Germany. That's what they all thought was going to happen. So World War II comes along. This is the most recent one. It applies to all the previous, but let's just stay with that. When the crisis comes, all of the R's, not all of them, significant numbers of R's switch to K's. Can I prove that? Actually, I can. We don't understand how shocking what I'm about to tell you is, because we weren't there, and society was very different then. But after World War I, the nations that fought in World War I were so devastated by that war, and I don't mean just physically devastated by the horrors of it, they were psychologically shattered by it. Prior to World War I, you could build unsinkable liners, and progress would just be linear and eternal, and off you go. But World War I shattered that illusion. 20 years, or not quite 20 years after World War I ended, in the mid-30s, and I need to get the date, somebody will provide it for me here in the magical comment stream. But 20 years roughly after World War I, the best and the brightest of the upcoming British generation, these were the people who were going to inherit the British Empire. And remember now, we're talking about a society that was the British Empire, 1930s. So these people's children were in school, and the best of the best went to Oxford University. And somewhere in the 1930s, the Oxford University Debating Society, which was world famous, had a debate, and the topic for the debate was, will we as individuals fight again for king and country? That was this debate topic. And the cream of the elite crop of the British Empire voted quite overwhelmingly, saying, no, we will not fight for the king or the country. You have to imagine the kind of shock that must have been to those surviving World War I veterans who just left eyes and arms and so many of their friends in the trenches. To have that next generation that they fought for say, no, the whole thing was nuts, insane. We're not going to do it. We're not going to. It must have broken their hearts and made them really quite insane. And so they were complete pacifists. They openly stated, we're not going to war. We're not going to do it. We saw what happened to our parents. We're not going to do it. We're not going. This is the cream of the crop. Several years after this debate happened, all of a sudden Hitler, February 9th, thank you very much for that, Ray, February 9th, 1933. So 1933, 15 years after the war, 1933, that generation of young students said publicly, we're not fighting for anything, screw you. We are taking care of ourselves. Let me know if any of this sounds familiar to you. One of the things that this fourth training predicts is that the heroes of this coming crisis will be Gen Z. They'll come from Gen Z, which I thought, come on. You kidding me? No. These guys, no. These guys going to go ashore on Iwo Jima? No. They're not going to go ashore on Iwo Jima because it's not going to be in Iwo Jima. So my point is, this is what reinforces the point. Those kids, those young students, those young pacifist idealists who in 9th of February 1933 voted somewhat overwhelmingly that they would never ever go to war. 7 years later, those kids were fighting over the skies of Great Britain in Spitfires, and they were coming back from Dunkirk. They were the greatest generation when they were young. The greatest generation as early teenagers said, we're not fighting for anything. We're not fighting for anything. We're done with fighting. They looked as weak and as incompetent, as incapable, as cowardly, and as despicable as Gen Z appears to those of us who are older today. But it was those guys that were the hero generation. That group of cowards at Oxford University who said, we're not fighting for king and country, who must have shocked the living daylights out of their parents, eventually became the greatest generation. That's what crisis did to them. That's why this wheel turns. So, what the theory says and what the biology says is that we change our psychology, and our literal biology rewires itself based upon how far away we are from the last real scare, the last real big scare. Ray Berry points out it wasn't 100, it wasn't 300 nothing, it was 275 for the motion and 153 against it. But that's a shocking number. Must have knocked those former Tommies from World War I on their asses in a way that nothing shocks us today. So stay with me here because I'm not quite done. The cycle occurs because when a crisis happens, society goes strongly K. 20 years after the crisis, the first generation born after the crisis generation would be my generation. I'm a boomer. I'm a late boomer. Late bloomer, too, for that matter. But I'm a late boomer. Baby boom was generally, most people say 46, 48 to 60. Some say to 64. But the 1960 generally. I was born in April of 59, so I was 9 months into the tail end of the boomers. And if I'd been more much later, I would have been Gen X. But I'm a boomer, and there's no question about it. And the reason I'm a boomer, and the reason that my generation thinks the way that we do, is because we did not go through that crisis. We didn't have to live through the trauma of the crisis. But our parents did. We had firsthand contact, firsthand daily contact with people who had lived through the crisis and who wanted better stuff for us. So by sheer accident of birth, I was lucky of the 4 generations that happen in this cycle, I was lucky enough to have been born in the perfect, the golden generation. I didn't have to go through the crisis. I didn't have to fight in Iwo Jima. But at the same time, I got all of the K lessons from my parents who did. And that's why our generation was a generation that said, we're going to be on Mars by 1970. We were told that we would be able to use nuclear power plants, desalinate the Pacific Ocean, pump water up into the Mojave, and grow rice or cotton in the desert. And there's no reason why we couldn't do it. And I still believe it. It's still true. We're the generation that had all of the idealism and all of the victory, all of that sense, that heady sense of we've done it, we've won this thing, we've beaten it. I wasn't alive for it. My parents did that. And that incredible rush of confidence that started in the 50s when it was clear that we'd actually won, that was over. That rush of confidence in the 50s, end of the 50s and into the 60s, was transmitted to me and my generation. So we became realistic idealists. We believed that if you worked hard, you could do anything, and that we were born in the greatest country in the world, and we know that because our parents had just fought to prove it, and that we were unbelievable. I hate the word privilege, but in this particular case, we were unbelievably lucky and honored and privileged to be here. And now that the fight was over, we're going to do our parents proud, and we're going to go faster, higher, and further. That's what we were wired to do. That's what I was wired to do. We're going to Mars, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. Nothing can stop us. We have nothing to stop us now because the threat that my parents had faced was defeated. Now there are no threats. And so off we go. The generation after mine, so if the winter generation is the greatest generation, I was in the spring generation. The generation after me, Gen X and Gen Y, we'll call them combined, did not have direct daily contact with the crisis generation, but they did have contact with them because for Gen Xers and Gen Y, that cohort's grandparents were the greatest generation, were the crisis generation. So they got to see their grandparents, but it wasn't the same degree of influence. My parents lived through World War II. My mom lived through the Blitz. She was 10 years old when they started bombing the place she lived in, so she knows what that was about. My dad was a little older. And that was 1940 for my mom. My dad was, by the time he was in 1945, he was 20 years old, so my dad was born in 25. So they lived through it, and they put that into our heads. They told us, you got to do this, you got to do this, you got to do this. Here are the rules. You need to follow the rules. This is a law and order society. We've beaten this horrible threat. We have respect for the society. You don't have to, you're not going to take a knee to anybody, but if you get in trouble, go find a policeman. Officer Friendly will help you. This is a lawful, structured, fair society. I'm not saying that there wasn't injustices around the edges and so on, and maybe even more than around the edges, but the ideal was that this was the case. And by the way, it's also true that a place like Baltimore in the 1950s and early 60s, which is now a bombed-out war zone, in the late 50s, early 60s, downtown Baltimore was populated. All of those burned-out houses had beautiful little flower gardens. The neighbors were black and white, more or less 50-50. They went to street parties. They'd have barbecues. They went down to the libraries. They were living together because they were working. They were getting paid. They had mom and dad in the family. If your kid did something wrong, you would tell that kid's parents, and that kid would be in deep trouble. And it didn't matter if you were black or white because it was a golden age. Gen X and Gen Z and Gen Y didn't have that. Now, when you get to Gen Z and the millennials, they have no contact at all with the crisis generation. So as we get further and further and further away from that crisis, K-type selection goes down because that quarterly improvement in the quality, that quarterly, every 20 years getting further and further and further away from contact with the existential threat, by the time you get to Gen Z, it might as well have been something that happened in Carthage, World War II. Has no bearing on them. As far as they're concerned, it is just not only is it not important, it's completely irrelevant. And so biologically, they are raised by people in Gen X, Gen Y who not only never went through the threat, never had daily contact with people who went through the threat. And so every one of these 20-year generations after the greatest generation becomes less and less and less respectful of law and order, less respectful of sacrifice, less respectful of the fact that there is such a threat. And so society becomes more and more abundant. The presence of the wolf at the door, the predator, is further and further in the past, and every one of these generations becomes less K and more R. And the more R you are, the less you care about following the law, the less you think that laws apply to you, the more you think that everything is yours, you're entitled to it. It's an endless field of alfalfa. Give me my iPhone. I want this, I want this, I want this, I want this. You haven't had to pay for anything because you didn't have to pay for anything. Now, I'm not blaming Gen Z for this because they didn't raise themselves, and I'm not blaming their parents either, because this is biology and we don't understand how subtle this effective psychology is. Just as a quick aside, by the way, I hate to cheat this, but there's no other way to explain it. Just as a quick aside, the reason I don't think you can assign blame to either Gen Z or to their parents is because so much of this stuff is invisible to us psychologically. The most shocked I've ever been in terms of just the power of the human mind is a result of a YouTube video, and I can't tell you about it without spoiling it for you, so I'm just going to have to spoil it for you. There is a YouTube video out there. It nearly knocked me out. I was so stunned by it. And it's basically a YouTube video. It's fairly old, and it says, okay, so here's the challenge. You're going to see a bunch of basketball players, and they're playing like on a, in concrete, like in a city someplace. Here's a challenge for this video. Can you count the number of times that the basketball is passed? That's the challenge. How many passes are actually made during this 60-second video? Ready, go. And so I want 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. And you're watching these things, you're counting these videos. 13, 14, 15, 16, you're watching the ball, watching the ball, watching the ball. That's the goal. And then it's done, okay? And then the screen goes to black, and it said, how many of you came up with, off the top of my head, 43? And I said, yeah, I saw 43 passes too. And then the video screen says, that's right, you're correct. The ball was passed 43 times. What did you think about the guy in the gorilla suit? What? Yeah, what did you think about the man in the gorilla suit? What the hell are you talking about? And then the video says, you didn't see the man in the gorilla suit? What man in the gorilla suit? Back up. Don't watch another version. Back up what you just saw. And what you just saw does not have a guy in the gorilla suit in the far background. Moving amongst the players, but never taking the ball, that's the point. Moving in and out of the players is a guy in a gorilla suit. It's not like he's hidden. He's right in the middle of all of this, and you don't see him. At least I didn't see him, and most people didn't, because I was so busy focused on watching that ball that I had filtered out everything else, and there's a guy in a gorilla suit in every single frame of that thing when they're passing the ball, and I never saw him. Never saw him. Now, if you go look for this, you'll see the guy in the gorilla suit, because I've just told you about it. But if you give it to a friend, it will blow their minds. It is so unbearably obvious that I actually had to go back and confirm that they hadn't changed the video somehow. It's astonishing. Right? So these are blind spots that we have, and so nobody's really to blame for this. It's just what happens. So one last thing on the biology. Because the conclusion is not a pleasant conclusion. It's not as unpleasant as many of the racial conclusions that people draw or many of the economic conclusions. It's just not, it's not even not hopeful, it's just there. It's what it is. One thing I added to the mix last night, because I was determined last night to prove this point to the best of my ability. And I'm not done proving it yet, but I'm getting there. I'd been aware of this, but I don't think, I might have talked about it once before on the show, but I don't believe I've ever really incorporated it. This is what I did. This is what I do. When I really am on my game, I'm able to take a lot of different things and synthesize them together in ways I personally have never heard anybody else do. And that provides a big picture that most people don't seem to be able to get because they're so busy figuring out this cool stuff. So I didn't come up with RK. I didn't come up with the fourth turning. None of this is me. But the guys that did come up with these things aren't looking at the situation from geostationary orbit like I am. So here's the final piece of the puzzle that I thought was missing. This is it. We're talking about behaviorists and humans and adaptability and so on. I've got his name, although I don't have it in front of me. I'll get all this stuff written out for these What Things to Come series to make these things point by point, step by step. But in 1968, a behavioralist named John something with an L, I think, was working on a problem. And his problem was, how would you design a human utopia? That's a noble goal. Every society has its version of utopia. The colonies is a utopian vision of my values and your values and what we think life would be like if we could live by those values. But it's still a utopian vision. And what this guy did was he tried to figure out how you would create a utopia. Now, the problem about trying to make a utopia for humans is you don't get to lock humans up in a laboratory for 7 or 8 generations and see what happens. So he had to go with something different. However, you can train a rat to press a food pellet if you give it an electric shock or a reward, and you can train a human to do the same thing as well. They've taken situations with rats where they would give them food and water, and alternately they'd give them food and water that had cocaine in it, and every single one of the rats starved to death because they'd rather have the cocaine through the water than eat. So there's a lot. John Calhoun, thank you. That's right. That's the guy. So there's a lot we can learn. And this idea that we're above all of this is a conceit that I don't adhere to. We are essentially made out of matter, and we have the same kind of programming that got us here and all the rest of it. So here we go. John Calhoun decided he couldn't find a way to make a human utopia, but he decided he was going to try because he knew this would take time. He wanted to know why societies collapse, because anybody can design a utopia, and many people have, and some have tried to build it, and always fails. Why? So John Calhoun decided to try to build a utopia for mice. He said, what if I were to build the perfect world for mice? That's what I'm going to try and do, because that's a manageable goal. And he was at it for several years, and somewhere around 1970, 71, he got the attention of the National Institute of Mental Health, NIM, the secret of NIM with the test rats. And so he got some funding. And he had done so many of these variations on this mouse utopia that by the time he was really ready to go, he had a room that was about the size of this studio. It's a gigantic space. And he called this experiment Universe 25. He called it Universe 25 because it was his 25th attempt to create a universe that was utopia for mice. So here's what he did. He took an enormous space, a physically gigantic space, and he filled it with everything that mice could possibly want. He had food stations everywhere. He had large variety of different kinds of food. There were fresh waters all around the room of this thing. It's a gigantic room, size that as well. It's big, big, big place. And he made the walls out of that kind of like, almost like wood shavings that mice like to really tunnel into, And on the other side of this wall, there's like an open common area. And on the other side of these tunneling areas, they had 256 little mouse apartments, individual little properties, individual little apartments that these mice could go into and raise families. There's enough room in each one of these apartments for 15 mice, which is plenty of room for mice. And he basically was, obviously there's not going to be any predators. He wanted to see what would happen when he created a mouse utopia. Now, I have to go back and get the numbers on this. I'm doing this from memory, so just bear with me on this. But this is essentially true. I just have to get the numbers precisely correct. His estimate was that this mouse utopia could support 6,000 mice. After that, it would start to get overcrowded, and that's what he thought was going to happen. Now, if you think about how mice reproduce, how quickly mice reproduce and so on, you would think that the problem with the mouse utopia would be overpopulation. No predators, all the food you can eat. The problem is going to be we're going to have too many mice. So he was really determined to isolate the variables. So he didn't just go get mice. He went and got 8 breeding pairs of laboratory specialized laboratory mice that were known to be in perfect health. He did this whole thing by the book. So he takes 8 breeding pairs, that's 16 mice. He puts them in this enormous open space filled with all of these wood shavings and everything that a mouse could want. There's food everywhere, there's water everywhere, there's all the room they could possibly need. And those 16 mice go in there, and those 16 mice have a frickin' blast. And in a very short period of time, he's got 650 mice, and everything is just cruising along. Fantastic. We've done it. Experiment 25, Universe 25 is the mouse utopia. And once they got to around 600 mice, he began to notice something. He began to notice that the male mice were starting to fight among themselves more than they had before. And he realized that the reason that the male mice were starting to fight more was because mice will band together to defend territory against predators or intrusions of any other kind. And since there were no predators, there was no common threat for these mice, so the bonding between the male mice weakened to the point where they began to just sort of randomly attack each other. Found that the female mice became less and less protective of their children because there was no external threat and husband wasn't coming home either beat up or cut up or not coming home at all. So the mother's behavior changed to the point where they were not caring for their children as much, and as things went on, they actually started doing things like eating their kids. As this continued on and the number of mice increased, this behavior got worse and worse and worse. The male mice now not only didn't get together, but the male mice would start having sex with anything that they could find, including other male mice. Homosexuality just appeared among this mice population. It just appeared because these mice had essentially nothing else to worry about. The females started eating their kids, and the females and the males had their birth rate plummet. This facility, this utopia, Universe 25, was presumed to have a perfect ideal population of 6,000 mice. 6,000 mice living comfortably, not overcrowding each other. Beyond 6,000 mice, overcrowding would start to become a problem. And so he thought, like everybody else, that the problem is going to be that we're going to get 6,000 mice like that. And once we get to 10,000 or 12,000 or 15,000, then these pathologies are going to come in. That's what he expected, but that's not what happened. The population peaked at 1,800 mice. Less than a third of the total available room for everybody to have their own apartment, nobody stepping on each other's toes. This cannot be stressed enough. At about a third of what this mouse utopia could hold, that was the maximum population, and then they died out to a mouse. They stopped reproducing. They just stopped. They stopped having sex with each other. They stopped having families. They stopped reproducing. They just plain stopped. And one of the really interesting little subsets of this was, as we got past that 600 mouse point and started getting into this real differentiation and these pathologies started coming in, there was a small number of mice that climbed up the sides of these walls. This is almost mind-boggling. And they ended up nesting as high as they possibly could away from this common area that the mice were just socializing in when they were less than 600. Mice just get together, hey, how's it going? Doing the things they wanted to do. But certain mice, as things started to hit that 600 mark and these social structures started to fall apart, certain mice would go way up high and they would live by themselves. And Calhoun called them the beautiful ones because these mice lived by themselves and they did nothing but sleep and groom themselves. They didn't have any scars, didn't cover with dirt. All they did was sit up there, eat, and sleep, and groom themselves. And the reason he called them the beautiful ones, because they had these beautiful shiny coats. They never once went down and interacted with the other mice. Now, mice don't have hierarchies. There's no alpha mouse. But these mice wanted nothing to do with the rest of the mice. They didn't want anything to do with each other. They just sat up there in the little mouse apartments and looked at Instagram pictures of themselves all day. And then the thing just plain went to hell. All these mice just started attacking each other, and more importantly, they stopped breeding, and so at about a third of the carrying capacity of this utopia, that's as high as they got, and then the mice just plain stopped breeding, and they died to a man. There were none left. They all died. Every one of them. They died because they had nothing to live for. They died because there was no threat. They died because there was no reason for families. There was no reason for anything. Mice did this. As an interesting subset of this, after this was over, he tried to find out, he's a good scientist, he tried to isolate some variables. He tried something similar to this on a more limited scale. And what he tried this time was, yes, even the beautiful mice died. Yes, of course they died. They're not, whether they died or old age or whatever, they just plain, everything died. So what he did the next time, he wasn't trying to recreate. He learned what he needed to learn. But as a chance to isolate some variables, when he tried it again, he created a section of this mice utopia that had a great deal more complexity. There were interesting tasks like mazes that had to be run and things like that. It was more of an intellectual challenge, more of a creativity challenge. And he found out that those mice that participated in what were creative activities for mice continued to breed and didn't develop any of these pathologies. As long as they had something to do, as long as they had a purpose in life, the mice were okay. But once all of the purpose in life disappeared, they just plain extincted themselves. They went extinct. They didn't overpopulate. The population collapsed. And this is what gave me my conclusion, which is not a pleasant conclusion, folks, but it's not a terribly unpleasant one either. We just need to accept it. If you've been with me for this whole time, this is the case I'm making. The case I'm making is very simple. Humans, all mammals, in fact, probably all animals, but certainly humans, animals, are not built for abundance. They're built for scarcity. And if you think about it, that makes perfect sense. In order to get here, we had to be able to cope with scarcity. Any of our ancestors that survived long enough to pass their genes on enough to make us had to be able to deal with scarcity, not with abundance. We don't know how to handle abundance. We're not wired for it. We're incapable of dealing with abundance. Abundance destroys us. We are built for adversity. We are not built for abundance. Abundance is the death of us. And once that got in there, I said, okay, so there's the cycle. That's how it works. Every 80 years is a human lifespan. It's not a coincidence. That's a human lifespan. A crisis occurs. Everybody goes to K-type behavior. Everybody pulls together. There's a threat. Everybody's scared. Significant numbers of K-type warriors are killed. Lots and lots of grieving parents. The threat is everywhere. Everybody is aware of the fact that they may all die tomorrow on some level or another. Victory is achieved. The euphoria of the victory takes a while to really sink in, but the generation after the crisis generation is nothing but optimism. We've got parents who told us that bad things happen if you don't do things the right way, obey the laws, do these things. We've suffered and fought and died to give you this civil society that's run by laws. Now go out there and do something with it and don't let us down. Okay? And then the next generation says, yeah, okay, sure, I get it. We grew up in a civilized society, and what else could there be? And the generation after that says, we're kind of bored with this whole civilization thing. Why do you think The Walking Dead, by the way, was so popular? Why do you think zombie movies are so popular? I wish I knew who said this, because it's one of the best things I ever heard. But basically, 5-6 years ago, somebody's trying to explain the popularity of these apocalyptic movies, of things like Squid Games and the popularity of Walking Dead and all the rest of it. And what this person said was, they said, in a world where, let me get this right. Something to the effect of, in a world where there is no adventure, the only adventure is destroying the world. That's why people like the zombie apocalypse. Sniveling cowards, like the Oxford kids or what we think of as Gen Z, are driven to things like this because they're curious to know how they would behave under stress. That's the appeal of it. Everybody who's ever watched a zombie movie watches a zombie movie for the same reason. They watch the zombie movie because, whether they realize it or not, they want to know how they would do if the zombies came. If the zombie apocalypse comes, how well would you do? And the further you get away from a real crisis, the more you get into fantasy crises like this. This is why the video games like Call of Duty are so popular. It's because we're wired for conflict. And if you want to know why people have hysterics over And I say hysterics, I mean screaming fits about throwing, if somebody in a movie studio sends somebody out to Starbucks and they ask for their pumpkin spice latte with soy milk and they come back with almond milk, they go ballistic into a screaming rage and throw this against the wall and fire that person. That's because they're built for stress and there is no stress. So they will raise the ambient level of stress and worry to what we are evolutionarily wired for. If we don't have to worry about the wolves or the leopards, then we'll worry about whether somebody got our order wrong at Starbucks. And we will have the same fight or flight reaction. We'll get pumped full of adrenaline and rage, and we will start screaming and thumping our chest and demanding justice because that's what we're built for. And that kind of response to a leopard is great. That kind of response to a barista, not so great. And all of this stuff goes round and round and round and round. And to me, it's rock solid now. This is the evidence that I was looking for to build this entire case and everything that follows from it. We worry about things because we're built to worry about things. And if we didn't worry about the leopard and there were humans who proto-humans who weren't worried about the leopard. They didn't have worries. They weren't afraid of everything all the time. They weren't constantly wondering about what could go wrong. And so they didn't see any need to post a guard at the entrance of the mouth of the cave while everybody else was sleeping. And so these perfectly well-adjusted, there are no real threats to worry about. Ancestors of ours are gone a long time ago, eaten by leopards, because they didn't think the leopard was a threat. So we're built for scarcity, we're built for stress, we're built for conflict, and we're built for crisis. And when we have one, our evolutionary wiring functions at its best. And the further away we get from that, the more of these biological essentials that are wired into us become no longer our friends but become our enemies. And so, after one human lifespan, the generation that's in the fourth quarter away from the crisis not only doesn't care about the crisis, it is utterly convinced that there is no crisis, that the crisis was something that older people either experienced and they won't have to experience because it's a whole new world and they're different than everybody else, every generation that came before them, or that there was a defect in the older generation that caused the crisis in the first place. They won't have to go through a war because they're not violent warmongers like their great-great-grandparents that they never met. And so everybody becomes a field of rabbits, and the next thing you know, we're at each other's throats, and we live in America 25, and everything falls apart, and it'll finally fall apart to the point where it's another crisis, and then this crisis will be such a shock to the system that it will eventually cause so much social stress and trauma that everything will go strongly K again, and then we'll go through this whole thing again, and I don't think there's a damn thing you can do about it. It is barely possible. So here's the thing about the wheel, about this cycle. This is good news. Yes, this is a cycle of construction and destruction. But what is absolutely true is that every time that wheel turns, we are further along than we were before. It is a sine wave of up and down, but the trend is up. Every time we go through this cycle, whenever we come back into that springtime of new creation, we're better off than we were the time before. It's inevitable. It is as inevitable as the seasons, and we don't have any problem with the seasons. Of course, I grew up in California, Bermuda, and Florida, so seasons are things that I read about in science books. But generally, we know that nobody likes the winter, and we know it's going to be a real drag for the next couple months. But we also know that spring will come, and then everything will turn green, and then everybody will get spring fever, and all of this mating stuff will kick in, all these hormones, and then we'll have 3 months of summer. We'll be out there in the sun enjoying ourselves, and everything's just as golden as it could be. It's absolutely the peak of the world, and there's not a care on the planet. And then fall's going to come. We're going to start saying it's getting a little chilly, and we don't get to have the kind of summer fun we used to have. And this isn't my first goat rodeo, so I kind of think it's going to get worse from here on. And then along comes the winter, and we just buckle down, and we know that spring is coming. There was a time, when we didn't know that spring was coming. Christmas Day, the birth of Jesus, was transitioned, if you'll pardon the expression. There's no question that biblically Jesus was born in the spring. There's absolutely no question about that. But his birthday was moved from spring to the winter solstice. Astronomically, because the Earth has got an axial tilt in the northern hemisphere. The Earth, by the way, the Earth's axis doesn't tilt. The axis stays the same, goes around the sun like this, and that means that for part of the year the sun is shining on the northern hemisphere, and then on the other part of the year it's shining away from the northern hemisphere, and thus the seasons. The point at which the sun appears to describe an arc. It starts out very low, and the height summer is as high as it gets in the sky, then it gets lower, 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 then it gets as low as it is in the sky. It's a sine wave. And there are 4 points to this, just like there are 4 seasons. This is what the scientific definition of the seasons are. The winter solstice is the point at which the sun in the northern hemisphere is at the lowest point above the horizon. It's going lower, 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 lower. It's actually the Earth that's tilting and going around, but the sun appears to be lower. The winter solstice is December 21st as a general rule. That is when the sun is at its lowest. The ancient pagans had a celebration at this time called the Saturnalia, and early Christians in Europe transposed the Saturnalia and basically spliced Christianity on top of it. They did a lot of that with Christianity and the pagans. The whole Easter bunny thing is Easter celebration is a celebration of fertility, and so that's how you get a rabbit filled with eggs. Rabbits don't lay eggs, especially chocolate ones, celebrated at the time of Christ's birth, because Easter was a fertility rite, and early Christians basically commandeered pre-existing holidays and put their holidays there, which is a damn smart way to do things if you really want to know. So on the winter solstice, before we understood things like axial tilt and so on, this scared the daylights out of people, and it scared them in a way that you really can't imagine. No matter how many times they recovered, pre-scientific humans were convinced that this time it's going to just keep on going. And only through prayer or blood sacrifice or whatever the case may be, throw some virgin into a volcano, whatever it's going to take to appease this sun, that point, that low point, the winter solstice, was the defining day. And that's why this is more or less where we put our new year. This is when the sun begins climbing up again. That's the height of the crisis, the winter solstice. The next of the 4 points is when the sun crosses the equator, and that means that the sun is halfway between its lowest and its highest points. That means that the days and the nights, when the sun's at its lowest, nights are long, days are short. When it's on its way up at the halfway point, that's called the vernal equinox. Equinox means equal nights. That's when the days and the nights are equal. That's the beginning of spring, technically. Then the sun gets to the sun. Technically, the seasons should be offset by 90 degrees to the astronomical thing. Summer solstice happens. So December 21st is the winter solstice. March 21st is the vernal equinox. June 21st is the summer solstice, when the point is highest in the sky. September 21st is the autumnal equinox, when it's on its way down again. December 21st is at its lowest point, and round and round and round we go. So all of these things together are governing our behaviors in ways that we're unaware of, and they govern our lives as well. We have seasons in our lives, and we have a spring where we're young children and everything's green and we don't have a care in the world. We have a summer where we're at our physical peak and the world's our oyster. We have a fall where we've reached emotional and usually influential maturity, when we're at our richest, when we're at our most powerful. And then we have a winter where things begin to decay and eventually you just die, and then it just starts again and off you go. So I believe this cycle is real. I believe that this biology is driving this cycle. I believe that the fourth turning is real. I believe that because of the structure of this thing, the coming crisis is never exactly the same, but it is obvious because things have to unravel before they actually hit the fan. And looking at the board here, coming out of the unraveling and going into the crisis, the thing I see unraveling is law and order. I don't see I don't see a military threat to this country. I don't see the possibility of civil war. I see the unraveling of our society that makes us want to kill our neighbors, but I don't see any real possibility that that's actually going to happen. And what I think is going to happen is it's going to come down to, we have created so much clover on this cycle. There's never been this much clover ever in the history of the universe, in the history of planet Earth anyway. There's never been the kind of abundance that we experience now, which means that this will be the most extreme example of the contrast. I personally think that as cycles go, looking out at the board, I'd rather be living through this cycle than the last one, and I'd certainly rather be living through this one than the one prior. I think this is not going to be as traumatic as World War II, and it's nothing going to be as traumatic as the Civil War was to American society. But if I look at where this lawfulness versus lawlessness exists, the first place it's going to be a problem is the cities. The cities have been murder pits for 50 years. As I said last night, we can say that it's Democrat run, and it's true. All of these places like Baltimore, Chicago, Atlanta, New Orleans, run by Democrats for 40, 50, 60, 80, 100, 120 years. And that's comforting for us to say it's not our fault. But the fact of the matter is we have had Republican presidents, houses, and senates, and we didn't do anything about these cities either. So for 50 years, this has been 60 years, has been a festering wound. And now the cities are... The first stage of this crisis is already apparent. This kind of toxicity, lawlessness, looting, violence, and murder is no longer going to be confined to the inner cities. It's already spreading to the nice parts of the cities. It is, Eric says, exactly, it's our fault from neglect. And I'm telling you, Eric, the neglect is not intentional. The neglect is not seeing the guy in the gorilla suit. Nobody's really to blame for this. If we could see it, we would have done something about it. We know what's going on, but we weren't aware of it. When Pearl Harbor was attacked yesterday, it was December 7th as we record this, they saw these incoming blips on this brand new thing called radar, and they were sure that it must be a group of B-17s that was expected. Because the idea that the Japanese would actually attack us, despite the fact that we know that their fleet's out there, we don't even know where their fleet is. It just disappeared. It was inconceivable to us. It just could not penetrate. It was like the basketball and the gorilla suit. We couldn't see it. Couldn't believe it. Couldn't see it. Same thing for 9/11. When 9/11 happened, we looked up and said, "What the hell's going on?" Second thing, it's a terrorist attack. What? No, couldn't believe it. We knew they were on our way. They knew they were coming. We just couldn't see it. So I'm glad Red Swamp Witch said racist, because I'm really glad to deal with this. So yes, we're going to have a problem with inner city violence spreading out. That's going to be largely a black problem. It's going to be inner city blacks who are extraordinarily violent and who have never ever been able to have control of their own lives. They've been force-fed subsidies and dependency, and they are incapable of working or doing anything because politics has pushed down onto them dependency as the only viable form of living that they know. So we don't have to worry about the inner cities anymore. We've been living with that problem for 30, 40 years. But San Francisco, as an example, no longer has a fisherman's wharf because the politicians, the rich white liberal politicians, the pretty ones way up high, have been bored, and so they've decided that down there where the other mice are, they're going to just play around and do something to make life interesting in their boring little perfect world. And so they basically have decided that they will enforce the law to say that you cannot arrest shoplifters at all in San Francisco. And so all of the stores that used to make up Fisherman's Wharf and these entire areas are boarded up shut, because when people come in to steal things and the stores call the police say we are not allowed to arrest them. And once it becomes clear that you can take what you want from stores, then people will take what they want from stores. And if you can just walk in and take what you want, you can't have a store anymore, and so the stores are closed. So the inner cities are going to be one of three fronts, I think. And here's what's interesting about this. We've needed cities throughout human history. Prior to the industrial era, Cities were located either at a major trade route crossroads inland, like I don't know, Baghdad, someplace like that. Or more commonly, they were located on a coast because trade is most easily conducted by water. So that's why you have cities like Rome and New York City, London, all of them. But there's always been a need for cities. In the pre-industrial era, you needed them as trade routes for people to swap their spices for their wool or whatever. In the industrial era, the pull towards cities was much greater because industrial economies require large numbers of people in a factory in a small space. That means that people all have to move from the countryside to the cities because they all have to be to work at the same place at the same time. And furthermore, each one of these factories has to supply the other factory within easy trucking distance. You can't make your tires in one place and then build the car on the other side of the world during a purely industrial era economy. So the thing we saw in the progressive era was a move from the countryside to the cities, and cities not only were still necessary, they were more necessary in the industrial age than they were in the agrarian age. But we are now in the information age, and in the information age, there is no reason for a city. We are still coming out of an industrial era economy, but we're well on our way to being a fully information age based economy. And what the pandemic showed us was that there was no reason, economic reason, for everybody to be in the same building at the same time. You can just stay at home. If you want to work from Antarctica, you can. And so here's why I think this is really bad news for the cities. If there is no longer an economic reason to have a city, then the only reason to live in a city is because of the benefits and the social benefits, not the economic benefits, the social benefits that a city provides. In other words, if you no longer need San Francisco or New York economically, and you did in the industrial era, in the industrial era without the internet, Madison Avenue was where all the advertising in America was done because all these guys had to be together. Clients had to come from around the country, fly to New York City, go up and down these ad agencies in Madison Avenue, and find out who was going to do the best campaign for them. They didn't get them faxed to them, and they didn't get them, send them as an email. They didn't do a Skype call to make the presentation. So if there is no longer an economic reason for cities, people still like to live in cities. I'm not one of them, but half of the country is. Then the only reason to live in a city is because of the social benefits you get from living in a city, and these are significant. Awesome museums, tremendous restaurants, incredible entertainment. Broadway, New York is New York used to be an amazing place to spend a week or 4 days. It's so amazing that when Sam Shepard was a screenplay writer, a playwright rather, before he became an actor and to write stuff and so on. Sam Shepard first went to New York City as a young man. He was on mescaline. He came from the country, got off the bus, and Sam Shepard said something I never forgot. He said, the first time I walked down New York City, streets of New York City, I'd just gotten off the bus from the country. I was wearing my cowboy boots. I'd taken some mescaline, and I walked down the street, and I looked down, and there were sparks coming off of my heels. I said, I'm with you, Sam. I know what that feeling's like. New York can be absolutely intoxicating, but if there's no economic reason for New York, and the only reason to live in New York is because of the restaurants, the culture, and all that stuff, which is real, if the destruction of law and order in the cities means that there is no longer a Fisherman's Wharf, that you can no longer go to a Broadway show without being mugged again or assaulted, if you can no longer express your opinion, if you have to live in the prison of your up-high skyscraper with the rest of the beautiful ones, and you are now a prisoner of your own little building, then there is no reason for people to live in the cities anymore, and that means that half of the population of this country is going to be looking for someplace else to live. And they're not only going to be looking for someplace else to live, they're going to be looking for someplace to live where they can have their R-type city values, and that's going to be a major, major, major refugee problem. An internal problem. Half of the country, in general terms, is going to be seeking refuge away from where they live to where we live, and they're going to want to bring their cultural ideas and their concepts with them, and that's going to be a problem. And when the crisis comes, most of them will switch to K because a conservative is just a liberal who's been mugged. Absolutely true. Once the crisis comes, most of them will change, some of them won't. Second front on this upcoming crisis is the border. So I managed to convince liberals that I'm a racist against black people because I talk about the toxicity of the city. So now let's convince them that I'm anti-Hispanic as well by talking about the fact that we now have tens of millions of single combat-aged males in this country. They are mostly still concentrated along the southern border, although they diffuse quite a bit. Those people are not here to build a better tomorrow for America so they can contribute to the Social Security Fund. They are here because they want stuff. They want the best stuff in the world, which is here. They want it. They don't want to pay for it, and they don't want to work for it. These are unlike actual immigrants. My wife is an actual immigrant. These are invaders, and they've been let in by the beautiful ones up in the top of the structure there, looking down on this mess that they never have to walk into. Gavin Newsom never had to step through human feces in San Francisco. That's why he allowed it. So they decided, well, this could be interesting. It's a death wish. That's what they have. This is how this thing goes around. They've just got a death wish. They're bored. So we are going to have to deal with the fact that we have tens of millions of not only combat age, but probably combat ready people in this country. I'm not entirely sure what their agenda is, but I do know for a fact that they're not going to develop hard-working relationships, pay their taxes, obey the speed laws, be sure to purchase full insurance, and buy themselves a nice little house and grow up with their families. That's not what they're here for. They're here to take stuff. It's an invasion, and we know it. Everybody knows it's an invasion. It's an invasion. And that invasion force is here, and they're going to have to be dealt with too. One of the small advantages we have on this particular front is, at least with the worst of them, with the most dangerous of them, it's kind of them to have come to America in uniform. Because if you see a guy with MS-13 tattoos on his face, he might as well be wearing a Wehrmacht uniform. You look at a guy with those tattoos and you know exactly what you're dealing with. Right? You know exactly what you're dealing with. He's put those tattoos on his face specifically so you would know what he's dealing with. And these people, it's true for the inner city people as well, and it's also true for the third class I'm going to get to in a minute. So if you're watching from Media Matters, at least do me the pleasure of hanging on for just a few more moments so you can get a balanced view of all of my prejudices, because the third one will surprise you quite a bit, I think. And so should we be worried about inner city gang violence spreading into the suburbs, and should be worried about cartels and that kind of thing invading the country? Yes, we should. Are they violent and dangerous? They absolutely are. But are they in themselves a credible threat to us? No. And the reason that they're not, let me get to the third sector because it works for all three. The third front is going to be directly in our suburbs, in our own homes, because the third front, and I think the largest threat to our society, is going to be composed of young, white, rich, grown children. They have never, ever had to be disciplined in any way. They believe that the entire world is, in fact, a sea of endless clover. Any restrictions on what they want to do is not only fiercely resisted by them, it is inconceivable to them. They are children, and they will never grow up. It's not a question of them facing reality and changing. They, from birth, have not been disciplined, and if you don't have this in your system by age 3 or 4, you're not going to get it. Jordan Peterson talks about this. He said something like, if you take 100 kids in a room, put them in a room, I think he said, I'm not quite sure about the numbers, he might have said either 10 or 20% of them will exhibit some antisocial tendencies, mostly young males. And of that 10 or 20%, 80 or 90% of that 20% will be socialized out of their antisocial tendencies. In other words, they're going to come in, they're going to act up, they're going to be aggressive, going to be all these other problems. But most of them will learn within the time that they're 4 years old that you just can't smack other kids. They'll be disciplined and they'll be taught you can't do that. And so they won't. The percentage of those that don't learn this by the time they're 4 will be career criminals, and there's nothing you can do about it. You can't do anything about it. He said 4 years old, he's right. If you have not been socialized out of bad behaviors, not everybody has these bad behaviors, but if you do, if you're one of that relatively small percentage that's not socialized out of them by the age of 4, you're going to be a broken person for the rest of your life. You're going to be a career criminal. You're going to be a drug addict. You're going to be violent. You're going to be whatever. You're broken and you're done. Now the problem is that whatever that percentage is, 3 or 4%, is a manageable percentage because they're socialized out of it. If there's 20% that have the tendencies and 5% that aren't socialized out of it, that means you save 15%. But if you are no longer socializing people out of bad behaviors and in fact encouraging bad behaviors, then the number of broken people that we produce will go from 5% to 30%. And that's going to be a hell of a problem. I continue to watch these police body cam videos because something else I mentioned last night. We are so unprepared for the kind of conflict this is going to be. We keep thinking Gen Z doesn't have the guts to go ashore on Iwo Jima. They won't have to go ashore on Iwo Jima. It's not going to happen. Not going to be a problem. I realized on the way to the event last night, I mentioned this at the event, I said, you know what? You know what the aircraft carrier of this conflict is going to be? The aircraft carrier was the defining weapon of the war in the Pacific. Arguably the defining weapon of the war, but strategic bomber aircraft carrier. You know what the aircraft carrier, fleet of aircraft carriers is in this coming conflict? It's the police body cam. That's our aircraft carrier. That is one of the most important weapons in this conflict because it not only provides us evidence of what's actually happening on the other side, it also provides evidence of just the astonishing job that the vast majority of law enforcement does. They're not policemen anymore. They're law enforcement people, they're psychologists, they're behavioral therapists, and often they're exorcists, because the reaction of young people who've never been disciplined at age 25 is jaw-dropping for people like me. Jaw-dropping, the degree of hostility. And not even hostility. The biggest threat is going to come from this third group of rich, white, English, Anglo kids. They're going to be the biggest problem that we're going to be facing because most of them are broken and they cannot be healed. They can't be corrected. They're going to be broken for life. We're going to have to take care of them for life. Last night at the event I said prior to World War II, the U.S. Army was the 16th most powerful in the world. When we found ourselves in the morning of December 8th, 1941, we couldn't train our soldiers with rifles because we didn't have enough. They had to train and march with broomsticks. They had to use broomsticks as machine guns. That's how far unprepared we were for the last crisis. And last night I said, at the beginning of World War II, in this country, we had hundreds of insane asylums and 3 aircraft carriers. Now, we've got a bunch of aircraft carriers and no insane asylums, and we're going to need the insane asylums. When we start gearing up for this conflict, once it's clear what we're really facing, we're not going to be building weapons. We got plenty of weapons. We got the best weapons in the world, and that's why it's not going to be a weapons problem, because we've solved that problem. We are going to have to be building mental health facilities that are going to have to take care of tens and tens and tens of millions of our countrymen for their entire lives. That's our arsenal of democracy problem. And that's what our soldiers are going to need. We're going to need combat psychologists. Because we are not the kind of people that just go and kill these people. They didn't ask for this. This isn't their fault. They didn't determine how they wanted to be raised, and we didn't determine it. It's the cycle. There's going to be millions and millions and millions and millions of Americans who are not only not going to be able to take care of themselves, they're going to be determined to do everything they can to stomp their feet until they die of old age. That's the crisis. That's where the main crisis is. And the reason I included them before I said why I'm not terribly worried about the 3 of them from a physical safety point of view is that gangbangers, drug cartel warriors, and adult children have many things in common, but the most important thing they have in common is they are incapable of creating large organizational structures because they have no trust bonds whatsoever. Criminals don't trust each other. You're never going to see a criminal roll on top of a grenade to save other members of his gang. Never going to see that. Grown children can have temper tantrums. They can shoot places up if they want to. They will never be able to form anything like a militia, let alone a serious combat unit. They are not capable of dealing on the kind of level of sophistication that we are. We can self-organize ourselves just fine to deal with these threats. I'm not saying nobody's going to get hurt. People are going to get hurt. But I'm not worried about them. I'm not worried. If you were to take all of the illegal immigrants in this country, all of the illegal immigrants that have come across the border, the combat-aged, I'm not talking about families, I'm not talking about people that are coming here to feed their families, I'm not even talking about the kind of immigrants, illegal immigrants that we had even 5-10 years ago. I'm talking about this invasion army. If you were to put AK-47s in the hands of 10 million of these cartel-type young men who've come into this country and put them into Texas and just put a boundary around Texas, the Texans would have these people in the ground in very little time and with very few casualties. Very few casualties. Which brings us to our real problem, which I'll get to in just a second. They are not capable of producing structures that are a threat to people like us who do have trust, who do have bonds, who do have higher callings, who are willing to make sacrifices, including our own lives for the greater good, who are willing to take a grenade for not only for their friends and their comrades, but for the idea. They're not a threat to us, existentially in terms of our physical safety, but they are going to make society unlivable. They're going to do their best, and we're going to have to be prepared for that. There is one serious problem that we're going to face, and this is what's going to cause us to be an actual crisis instead of a bad inconvenience. When the state no longer provides law and order, then the citizenry will take law and order into their own hands, and they will provide law and order. I have seen some horrible things in my life on purpose. I go looking for it because I need to know these things. I just need to know. I have seen a number of cases. I've seen some horrible things, and part of that was to toughen me up because I cannot be incapacitated in emergencies, and also part of it was to understand what the world is like outside of this Disneyland bubble that we've created for ourselves. But in places like Brazil, and especially in Africa, all around the world, in the poorer the neighborhood is, the more vicious this becomes for reasons that are perfectly clear to me. When a thief is caught in Africa or in a ghetto in Brazil or Rio or something, they are not turned into the police. If a thief or especially a rapist or anything like that is caught in the act, they are taken into the street and beaten to death. To death. And I've seen it many, many times. It's not so common in South America or other places. In Africa, it's almost de rigueur that not only will they be beaten to death, but they'll be burned alive as well. This business of necklacing that's been common in Africa for many years now. One of the ways that they get rid of their criminals, or obviously other tribes, but in the case of legitimate social complaint, if somebody steals something, or if somebody rapes your daughter, a village daughter, and they catch this person is dragged into the middle of the street. They're beaten with sticks until they're barely conscious. An old tire is placed around their neck. The tire is filled with gasoline, and then it's set on fire. And this thief is burned alive until he's dead. And all of the other thieves in the neighborhood see this. And this is what happens when there is no rule of law. The citizens will protect themselves. All normal people hate and despise murder and theft. Whatever makes criminals criminals hasn't gone away either. But when you take away law and order, the citizenry will do the job that the police doesn't do. And here we come to our problem, because this is something I've never seen before. Our problem in this crisis is, this wouldn't be a crisis, it'd be an easy thing to fix. But it isn't going to be an easy thing to fix. Our problem is not that the state is not enforcing the law, because if the state doesn't enforce the law, then citizens will enforce the law. Our problem is that the state is enforcing the lawlessness. That's our problem. The coercive power of the state, the power of the law, the power of legal use of lethal force is on the side of the lawless. That's our challenge. Our challenge is not defending our homes against these people. Our challenge will be defending our homes against these people and not being put in jail for it. That's what the problem is going to be. In California, which is one of the most R-selected places in the country, in the world really, if somebody comes into your house in California and you shoot that person, chances are good that you are going to go to jail, and the person who's in there to take your stuff or murder you is going to get a settlement. And if you defend yourself, then you're going to go to jail. It's just that simple. Which is why I've been told by two police officers here, told by two police officers on separate occasions. These guys didn't know each other. I was talking to them about this kind of thing before my terrible boating accident. I needless to say, I was armed like most adult human males should be, although it took me a long time to understand that. But prior to the boating accident, where all of those weapons fell overboard, tragically enough, I would talk to police officers, active duty police officers, and I would ask them this question specifically. I didn't ask them, what do I do if somebody breaks into my house? I said, what do I do if I have to use a firearm to defend myself in California? And both of them told me the same answer, astonishingly close to almost the same exact words. What these guys told me, what these police officers told me was, Bill, if somebody's inside your house and you shoot them, you have to empty the clip into them. What? You have to empty the clip into them, Bill. You have to just keep shooting. And if you've got your head around you, put 4 or 5 rounds into the guy and put 2 or 3 into the surrounding walls where it won't hurt anybody else. What? Why don't I just shoot the guy? He said, in this state, Bill, if you can show that you had enough control to shoot this guy, then they're going to say you had enough control to not shoot this guy. So you have to act as if you were in an utter panic and had completely lost control of your mind, and you simply went into reflexive mode and you emptied the clip, because if they can show that you had enough control to shoot this intruder, which you have every right to do, then they will claim that you could have not shot this guy, that you could have maybe had a conversation with him, or maybe you could have shot the knife out of his hand, or any of the rest of this bullshit these people believe. Empty the round into him. I mean, the clip into them, the magazine. I said, I said this to the first person I told you, this first policeman. I said, I was about to say that this doesn't make any sense. But it does. It makes California sense. It makes California sense. I thought that what they would have wanted was for me to have enough control to put 1 round in this guy, get him down, and I'm not anxious to kill the guy. I just want to stop him because I don't know what he's doing in my house, and I'm going to assume the worst. They said, "Yep, that's what a sane society would do. Sane society would say, congratulations, well done on your trigger discipline, well done on your ability to make sure there was nothing, downrange of it. But this is not a sane society. You have to look like you panicked, or else you could be in trouble. Panic is your best defense." Okay, so all right, that's the distillation of the kind of problem we're going to have. Now they can do that as long as it's a few of us who have to deal with this. But when things really start to come apart, everybody's reality will wake up most of the people. It will wake up most of the people. This is why the body cam is the aircraft carrier of this future conflict. Because the forces from the beautiful people at the top who are trying to format this social suicide because they're bored. That's the only reason, by the way, because they're bored. They will look for any excuse to stop you from protecting yourself because they don't want a lawful society. They want chaos. So those are the rules they're going to enforce. Play by that. But when everybody's having to do this, this will rapidly not become a problem. And the body cam is the aircraft carrier of this coming war, because it not only shows the main thing that these body cam footages do is they show the unbelievable provocation, right? You hear a cop shot a guy. Oh, a cop shot a guy. Maybe you shouldn't have done that. But when you have this officer saying 19 times, "Get on the ground or I will shoot." And this guy keeps coming at him with the knife. "I don't want to do this. Get on the ground if I." When you see that, then that narrative just doesn't survive. It just doesn't. I can't tell you. I've always been a supporter of the police and law enforcement, but when I read these comments in the body cam videos, so many people said, "I actually had no idea that being a policeman, that you couldn't pay me enough money to do this. I had no idea that the police were this tolerant and trying to de-escalate things." Brick Jonesy says, "Never talk to the police ever." Well, you're right about that. Certainly if you didn't do anything. If you've been unjustly accused, the thing to say is, "Respectfully, officer, I'm sorry. I'm going to invoke my right to not speak to you until I have an attorney present," and just follow their lawful commands. "Get out of the car." "Yes, sir." "Turn around, put your hands behind your back." "Absolutely, yes." If you're not guilty, then yeah, don't say a word. On the other hand, not to argue with you, although maybe to a little bit, if you are guilty of something relatively trivial, then just my experience has been own it. And once you own it, that mitigates everything. And when I say not a terribly serious thing, I'm talking about things like a speeding ticket or something like that, you know. I haven't had a speeding ticket since I've been married, probably just a coincidence. But I used to get quite a few of them when I was a younger guy. And so I probably had, I don't know, maybe 10 speeding tickets in my life, maybe a little less than that. Every single one of them, with two exceptions, I said, okay, well, I was speeding. I got a speeding ticket. I'll pay the ticket. Maybe I'll do the course just to get the points off my license. But there's no question I was guilty. I knew I was guilty. I never argued that I was not guilty. So speeding ticket, I'll pay it. Two times I was given, both times when I was a limo driver, two times I was giving speeding tickets not speeding tickets, I was giving tickets that I did not deserve. One of them was for turning right on a no right turn on red intersection, and I had a green arrow, and I turned right on the green arrow, and the police said, "You didn't have a green arrow, you had a red light." I said, "Oh, respectfully, sir, no, I didn't. I saw the green arrow." "We were behind you, and you saw you turned right on red." I said, "Okay." He said, "You need to sign this ticket." I said, Is this an admission of guilt?" He said, "No, just a chance for you to show up in court." I said, "Great." So the next day I went back there, and I took a camera, and I parked my car where I had stopped, and I walked that camera back to where the policeman was, and I showed that you could not see that green arrow from where that guy was at the time he issued the ticket. I was prepared to win that in court. The guy didn't show up. So the two tickets that I felt I didn't deserve, I took to court and fought, and I won both of them. But the ones where I was guilty, I was just guilty. Now, last ticket I almost got was when I got my new Camaro in 2012, and I was zooming up this hill, and I guess it was probably a 35 zone or something. And I'm just digging. It's the first new car I'd ever had in my life. I was 53. It's the first new car I ever had. And I was zooming up this hill, and police lit up behind me, and I pulled over, and he said, "Do you know why I'm pulling you over?" I said, "Yes, sir. I was doing 56 miles an hour in a 35 mile an hour zone." And he didn't know what to say to that. He'd never heard that before. He said, "Really?" I said, "Yes, sir. It's a new car, and I've always wanted one of these, and I was just excited about it. I was careful, but I was no question I was speeding. Yeah, absolutely, 100%." And the guy said, "Okay, don't do that again." "No, sir, I won't." "Thank you very much. I deeply appreciate the warning." And just let me go. That's what I think. I don't think it was so much an act of kindness as he was just stunned. He was just mentally incapacitated for probably the next hour. He probably called all his friends, when he got back to the station. "You'll never believe what happened to me today. You will not believe what happened to me today." "What happened?" "So I shoot. No, I pulled this guy over for speeding. He's doing 56 in the 35 zone. I asked him, "Do you know why I pulled you over?" He said, "Yes, I was doing 56 in the 35 zone. I didn't know what to do, so I let him go." That is, that's just being a man. That's just honor. That's just decency. I mean, that's just being an adult. That's responsibility. That's what it is. I know I've said this not too long ago. I'm going to say it again because it's part of related to this whole things to come dynamic about responsibility and taking responsibility, because the one thing that this generation shows is it's not that they refuse to take responsibility for their actions, it's that they do not understand that they have responsibility for their actions. That's an important distinction. It's not that they are fighting and resisting arrest and all this other stuff because they are resisting the law. It's because they have no conception that the law applies to them. And why would they? They've never had to obey the rules before, ever. Why would they ever think differently? When these young people, these Gen Zers, are pulled over, they start off by being combative because they know their rights. And I'm being, yes, you were speeding. Well, you need to step out of the car. Well, I'm calling my lawyer. Well, ma'am, your lawyer is not coming here. You have a right to an attorney. You just don't have a right to an attorney right now. There are no airborne special forces attorneys that are in orbit above the city in C-130s with their combat gear, ready to drop down and parachute into the situation to protect you from the consequences of your actions. You can have an attorney. You're entitled to an attorney. You don't have to speak to us if you don't want to, but having an attorney in here now is not going to happen, and it never does. So get out of the car. And they resist. Let me rephrase that. They don't resist. They fail to comply. And so when they say get out of the car, when the police say get out of the car, and they say no, and they say, ma'am, I'm giving you a lawful order, get out of the car. Why? Why do I have to get out of the car? You have to get out of the car because I told you to. Well, that's no reason. You have to tell me what I did. I didn't do anything wrong. I want to know why I have to get out of the car. Ma'am, you're going to have one more chance to get out of the car. If you don't get out of the car, then we're going to get you out of the car. And I don't want to do that. But if we do, then you're going to jail for resisting. But I didn't do anything. So they pull them out of the car. And they're amazed. They're amazed. What the F is going on? What's wrong with you? What's happening? This is not an act. They're not acting outraged. They can't process it. We told you to do something, yeah, and you didn't do it, yeah. So now you're going to jail. Well, I've been told to do things my whole entire life, and I never did them, and nothing ever happened to me before. They can't process it. When I've seen so many times these policemen will ask them, can I see your driver's license, please? Driver's license, registration, proof of insurance. They look at the police officer. This is really important. They don't look at the officer like, God damn it, I've been caught, They look at the police officer like, what? It's like he's asking them for the subscription to Field and Stream magazine. Can I see your Field and Stream magazine subscription, please? My what? Driver's license? No. That's for old people. I don't need a driver's license. What do I need a driver's license for? It's required by law. I live just down the street. I just went to work. What's the big deal? Why are you harassing me? I've heard it 100 times. So, Brick says, don't talk to police means don't argue with police. Fair enough. I want to point out, for those of you who think that I'm a police jockstrap sniffer, that this coming conflict is going to have its own weapons, like body cams and so on. It's also going to have its own traitors. It's going to have its own traitors. It's going to have its own Benedict Arnold. It's going to have its own people that basically provide so much aid and comfort to the enemy that they're traitors. That's the only word for them. And the frontline traitors of this coming conflict are going to be crooked cops. Or not just even crooked cops. Cops on power trips. Cops who are exceeding their authority. They're going to be the traitors of this coming conflict, because police that exceed their authority are going to provide so much ammunition to the lawless. They're going to give them so much evidence that their side is morally correct and that ours is morally evil, that it is essentially, it's like turning over secrets of the propeller design of a nuclear submarine. They are traitors, policemen who abuse their legal authority, either intentionally or unintentionally, are traitors to law-abiding citizens, the entire idea of the rule of law. And they need to be removed. And then the people who need to remove these traitors are the other policemen. Sheriffs are greater than cops. 100% agree, Steve. 100% agree. Because a sheriff is an individual. Sheriff is not elected. A sheriff is elected, but the sheriff's not beholden to the mayor of the city. If a sheriff says this, sheriffs are our last line of defense. I didn't understand the sheriff's department until 10 years ago. Sheriffs are amazing. They're miracles. But these cops, if you look at the number of genuine police brutality, genuine police abuse of power cases, you will find that virtually all of them are a small number of the same individuals. They need to be removed, and they need to be removed by the police, and they need to do it quickly. Once things really start getting out of hand, the police are going to have to understand that these guys are selling your position to the Japanese Navy pilots that are coming to sink your ship, and you had better do something about them, because they are going to be a complete catastrophe. You are going to have to clean this up, and you're going to have to do it quickly. I have seen, in addition to the police body cam videos, I've also seen videos that chronicle police abuse of power or unwittingness on what the limits of their power are. Some of these are extremely confrontational, and I don't particularly like that, but it's also important. Some of these are guys saying, some policeman will come up and say, hey, I want to talk to you. I have to ask you a few questions. Why would you want to talk to me? Well, we've had complaints because you're walking around filming everything. Well, so I'm outdoors, I'm filming things. Yeah, well, what are you filming, and why are you filming it? I don't have to tell you that. Let me see your ID. I don't have to provide you with ID. I have not committed any crimes. Am I being detained? That specific kind of thing, that guy is right and the police officer is wrong. You don't have a right to just walk up to somebody and say, I find what you're doing suspicious. That's not reasonable doubt. And of course, most people use reasonable doubt to get away with, oh, you don't have any right to search my car. You have no right to search my car. Ma'am, you just blew through an intersection at 120 miles an hour. You struck another car. Your car's inverted upside down on the side of the road. I have reasonable suspicion that you are, probable cause, that you are driving intoxicated. I want my attorney. You have your attorney. This is the line we have to walk. We have to walk this line, and we have to protect our rights. But we also can't let the most of the people that commit these acts of resistance against the police. They all say the same thing. I know my rights. You don't have no right. You have no right to arrest me. I can't tell you how many times I've heard that. You're under arrest. No, I'm not. Yes, you're under arrest. You have no right to arrest me. Turns out he does. You have no right to search my car. I didn't search your car, ma'am. It's in plain sight. You've got a bag of white powder on the front seat of your car. It's obvious to me from the outside of your car. Now I have probable cause to search your car. This is a balance. This is how rational people have to deal with it. But some people think that their rights, what they consider to be their rights, is they have a right to no consequences. And nothing more crazy than this in the sovereign citizen idea. I've seen a number of people pulled over. Can I see your driver's license? I don't need a driver's license. I'm sorry? I don't need a driver's license. Ma'am, you do need a driver's license. No, I don't. I don't. This is not a commercial vehicle. It's a private vehicle. I'm not driving, I'm traveling. I don't need a driver's license. Yes, you do. Turns out you do. You do need a driver's license. And I don't buy the sovereign citizen thing. At the same time, when somebody says, so let me just, since I'm just on this roll, we're not going to any questions, I'm sorry about that. Since I'm on just this ramble, let me just deal with some of the things that Brick brought up, because he's right. You cannot become a police state if it's going to be a battle of the law-abiding versus the lawless. We've got to protect our rights while we enforce the law. So let me give you an example of where I draw this line. If I'm driving erratically and the police pull me over and they accuse me of driving under the influence, and I wasn't driving under the influence. If I wasn't driving under the influence, and even if I was, I would probably say, respectfully, officer, I'm going to choose to exercise my right to remain silent here. If you didn't do anything, you've got nothing to be worried about. That's fine, sir, but I have the right to remain silent, and I'm going to exercise that right. I'm not going to say a word, because attorneys will tell you that if you don't say anything, the more you say, the tougher it is for them to get you out of something if you didn't do it. So I'm right there with you on this. If I'm driving drunk and I'm driving erratically and I get pulled over, then I was drunk driving. Now, it might be smart for me to not say anything, but ultimately I'm guilty. However, I will, if I'm pulled over in a traffic stop or something like that, I will cooperate with the police because either I'm innocent or I'm guilty. And if I'm innocent, I got nothing to worry about. And if I'm guilty, then I deserve the consequences of my illegal behavior. But here's where I will agree with you completely on this, Brick. And I'm only glancing at what you're seeing, so excuse me if I'm misunderstanding you in some way. I'll tell you where I will argue with the police, because it needs to be an argument. I have seen these in Los Angeles, not too many of them, in fact, not any in the last several years, but I have seen situations where driving down Ventura Boulevard and there are police lights there and there's a line of cars and the cars are pulling up and roll down the window and the police walks up and you say, "Good evening, officer, what can I do for you?" He says, "We're having a sobriety checkpoint." Those people I would argue with. I would do that to protect not only my constitutional rights, but everybody's. I'm sorry? We're having a sobriety checkpoint. So you're stopping everybody? That's right. Well, sir, with all due respect, that is clearly a violation of my Fourth Amendment rights. You have no probable cause to pull me over. I understand, unlike most people you have to deal with, for which I have a great deal of sympathy, mind you, I completely understand that a lot of people use probable cause to get out of the way. But in this particular case, you have no probable cause. You have no reason to stop me because you have not seen anything unusual or suspicious about my behavior. And since you have no probable cause to stop me, I'm asking you now whether or not I am under arrest or whether I am being detained and free to go. Because if I am under arrest, I will comply with your lawful orders, but in court, we're going to have an interesting discussion about why I was arrested. And if I'm not under arrest or being detained, I'd like to go about my business. This is the kind of brushback pitch that you have to issue to the police department to make sure they understand where that line is. I would be completely respectful, and if the guy said get out of the car, I will say, all right, I'll get out of the car, sir. I'll do it under protest, but I will get out of the car. I will comply with your instructions, but I am not going to assent to a non-specific stop everybody sobriety checkpoint without protest. So consider this under protest and consider this matter to be not resolved. And then I'm going to do what he tells me to, because I don't need to get I know who's going to win this fight even if he's wrong. If he says get out of the car and I say no, all right, I know what the outcome of that's going to be. And then I could get a legitimate charge of resisting arrest. So if it's a field sobriety checkpoint and he says, all right, we're just checking you, and I said, he's going to get the response I get. Sir, I respect law enforcement, and I'm not one of these people that talk about my rights without understanding what they are. If you have probable cause to pull me over, then that's a reasonable reason to pull me over. But when you're pulling over everybody, that is a clear violation of my Fourth Amendment right, and I'm not going to submit to that. So, am I under arrest or being detained? If so, why? And if not, I'd like to go about my business. If we don't do that to the police, then just because they're made out of human animals like the rest of us, they will continue to not know where that boundary is. It's up to us to let them know what it is. Sadwings Raging, who had another earlier super chat about Taffy, thank you, Sadwings. I see Bill never grew up in a dry county. We had roadblocks all the time until the county went wet. I did not grow up in a dry county, Sadwings, but I will tell you this. When I was a young kid, just after I started at the planetarium, a couple months afterwards, Jack Horkheimer's show that I've talked about, Long Journey of a Young God, was purchased, I guess it was bought, and a planetarium wanted to run it. And I wanted to say was it the Bay? It was someplace in the Tri-Cities area of Tennessee. And I used to remember their name. I want to say Kingston is one of them. Bay Mountain, maybe. So I'm 13 or 14 years old, and I'm going up there to install this planetarium show. I'm there with Phil and a couple of other people, and that was my first experience in a dry county. And this was how ludicrous this was. This is the experience I had. We went out to dinner with the people at the local planetarium. They took us out to dinner. We went to a restaurant, and if I remember correctly, you could not order a drink there. You could, however, bring your own bottle, but your bottle could not sit on the table. The bottle had to be on the floor, and you had to pour the drink yourself. You could not order a drink. You could not have the bottle on the table, but you could pour yourself a drink. And I said, this is the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. If it's illegal, it's illegal. If it's not, it's not. What is this? This is insanity. My understanding is that that's why bars are bars, by the way. I think this probably precedes America, but the idea of a bar is you have to stand while you're drinking because you can't get so drunk while you're still standing. If you're sitting down, you can get considerably further drunk than you can become so drunk that you can't stand, but if you're sitting down, you can drink yourself till you're unconscious. My understanding, that's why it was a bar. That's why you would stand at a bar, was because you could only drink yourself till you couldn't stand up anymore. So yeah, this kind of thing is nuts, and it's just it's silly, and having laws that you don't enforce are much worse than not having any laws at all. I want to say in Coral Gables, I'm sure this existed everywhere. There were these things called the blue laws. These are all these weird sort of, it's illegal to parade a chicken on a Sunday kind of laws, and that these laws were basically there to give the police an excuse to arrest you for something that you had no knowledge of because it's simply insane, and that if they really wanted to get you for whatever reason, you hadn't done anything wrong, they could just crack out one of these, you're not allowed to drive a red car on a Tuesday or whatever the hell else kind of nonsense there was. Yeah, that stuff's not good for anybody. I was hoping to take questions tonight, but I basically was just on a roll. I had synthesized a lot of ideas, and I was happy to get them all out for you. So hopefully, it was worth the game was worth the candle for you, and I will get to the questions next time. Benjamin Good has an interesting line here. It just caught my eye because I see so many comments scroll by. But this looks interesting to me. He said, "Humans are built to worship. With the departure from the churches happening, they worship themselves." Yes, this is a form of purpose. John Calhoun said that the Universe 25 was doomed at 650 mice because that was the point where they lost social cohesion because they no longer believed in anything. And when you don't believe in anything, you will see, this is it, man. We're wired. We need to believe in things. I was at a really fun event last night, and on the way out, I met some really, really interesting people. One guy who said, "You really need to get involved." And he said, "I've never met you before, and I've seen one of your videos, but you're clearly, original thinker, and you really pay a lot of attention to details." He said, "You really need to get into evolutionary psychology. They've got a school up at Santa Barbara that's the best place in the world. You really need to get into this." He recommended a book and stuff. So we're talking about a bunch of things with this guy. And there was a point to this. Hang on one second. This is actually, what was the hell he was talking about? Yeah, we were talking about Richard Dawkins. I said the thing about Dawkins is that Dawkins' anti-religious worldview is a religion. It's his religion, and it's shared by millions of people. Every time you run into somebody who says, "I don't believe in God, I believe in science," that's a religious belief. Among many other things, it is an absolute 100% indication that a person says, "I don't believe in God, I believe in science." That is a giant flare being shot up that says, "I don't know what science is. I have no idea what science is." Science is the golden idol I worship, because science is effective. There's no question about that. Science is not a belief system. Science is not a philosophy. Science is a very specified, very specific set of instructions and rules on how to determine what is true in nature. It is not a philosophy. It is not a worldview. It is a tool. It is an intellectual instrument. And when it is used as designed, it is unstoppably effective. Sagan would say things like, if you've got, oh, come on, whatever, pick an example, bubonic plague, you can either pray to God or you can get 50 cc's of penicillin. Trust science, he said. He's selling science. He's selling science as if it's a religion. It's not a religion, Carl. It's your religion, so I guess it is a religion. But you're supposed to be the spokesperson for science, and you are yourself making the mistakes that you accuse everybody else of making. That's not a scientific statement. That's a religious belief. A scientific statement would be to say, the results of administration of penicillin against bubonic plague has been shown to be more effective than prayer, but that is not saying pick one or the other. You're selling science as a worldview. You're selling it as a religion, and that's fine. But at least have some truth in advertising. What you're really selling is materialism. You're selling a belief that the world is explainable through mechanisms that are understandable by science. And you may be right. In fact, it's entirely possible that you're likely right. But let's call it what it is. Let's not pretend that this is a religion whose God functions reliably, because that's another thing Sagan basically says. He says you can believe in your sky god, or you can believe in science, and science will provide you with results. Well, yeah, but that's not religion, Carl. And I don't believe in penicillin. I don't need Novocaine worship in my life in order to have meaning. This is a bigger issue than that. You're a smart guy. How can you not see this? I occasionally do a radio show with Father McTeague, Robert McTeague, who has a Catholic Jesuit priest who's a big fan of mine, and asked if I would do a show. And he's such a brilliant guy and such a pleasant guy. I learned so much from him. I've done it probably 7 or 8, 9 times now. And and he said something. He said he was in an argument with an atheist friend of his once. And keeping in mind that Father McTeague is a Catholic priest, and his friend said, "I don't believe in God." He says, "I believe in science. I believe in physics." And Father McTeague says, "So does that mean that you celebrate Mass?" How do you not love a guy like that? How do you not love a guy like that? That is the most gentle, deep, retort I think I've ever heard in my life. Ever. Does that mean you celebrate Mass? Fabulous. All right, kids. Well, it's been a fun little rant. It's always fun talking to people. I kind of went through this again because I just sort of debriefing from last night. All the stuff I talked about is going to be broken down into bite-sized chunks, because there's no way to put all this together. There's no way to expect people to listen to 2 hours of it. However, when I get this footage back, I want to say I did about 50 minutes, maybe a little longer, of speaking, and then I did at least an hour of questions, and that'll all be there. I'll put it up on one. Piece in YouTube, and I'll say the actual talk is 53 minutes. Questions start at this. If you don't want to watch all of it, you can get out there and watch as much of it if you want to. But basically, covered a lot of ground there, covered a lot more ground tonight, and all of these things have to be broken down into little 6, 7, 8 minute segments that taken together, are each one stand on its own merits individually, but taken together provide a really compelling case in the way that I thought the virtual presidency did. And I'm going to have to get that stuff posted too. So I'm going to add a page to the website for speaking events, and I'm going to add a page, probably a virtual presidency page and so on. Just keep adding them. We've had some problems with the pull-down menus. Some people don't like the scrolling. I understand that. I'll figure out a way to put some shortcuts in there. And we still have some formatting issues. For those of you that are interested, there's a template for a post, and then there's a template for a page, and I keep constantly getting these things cross-bled over, but we're getting nearly there. Last thing for the night, after I finished writing An Empire of Terror back in November, December last year, something like that, maybe a little bit earlier, rewarded myself by going out and getting a gaming PC with a 4090 graphics card, because I had been just put in. Oh, thank you, Brick. That means the world to me, because I deeply appreciate your viewpoint, and it's always nice to know when you can kind of get to a place where rational people agree on most things. By the way, just a very aside to the aside, last night I said I'm not too terribly worried about our physical safety in terms of this crime thing, and it's largely going to be contained to where it is, and as it starts to spread, we'll have plenty of time to move. And as I was answering questions, a woman came up and spoke to Natasha and said, your husband's amazing. It was an amazing speech, and I could probably do 25, 30 minutes about all the wonderful things she said about me, but I'll spare you that. But she said, but I'm an attorney in Los Angeles, district attorney in Los Angeles, and this business about us being safe is just not true. What we're seeing in Brentwood and Beverly Hills now is genuinely disturbing. We're seeing lots and lots and lots of violent home invasions and things like that. And I'm saying, well, that's what you voted for. Beautiful ones. So we'll see. But thank you very much for that, Bricks. Very, very sweet. Good to know. Okay, so I bought this PC, and I was hanging out with my friend Phil, and we were playing DCS and flying F-18s around, and I'm trying to teach that boy how to fly formation, like I know what I'm doing. But I needed some kind of recreation, and I'd been working real hard for years without it, so I got it. And it was working real well, and then suddenly it wasn't. It would just start crashing. I thought it must be a new version of DCS, and it just kept crashing. Got to the point where Chrome was crashing, and browsers were crashing, and I thought, God damn, what is it, I think I spend 90% of my time fixing things that should be working. Software that should be working, hardware that should be working. I spend 90% of my time doing repairs and maintenance on stuff that should just be working. So I took it into a computer guy. I got a great computer guy. I like him very much. Hadn't seen him in a while. So just liked talking to him. He's a nice guy. So I took the box over there and I said, hey, this thing's crashing all the time. I don't know what it is. Can you check the page file settings and all the rest of it? So he took a look at it, did a test on the RAM, tried everything. He said, I can't find out what the matter with this is. I said, I think it just needs a new window install, but the thing is so corrupted that I cannot install Windows. I can't even pave the drive. It won't let me pave the drive. It's just bad. So we had it for a day and a half, and then he said, I found out what your problem is. I think you've got a bad SSD, bad solid-state drive in there. It's kind of a low-end drive, and this is a nice system, so I put a Samsung terabyte SSD in there, and that should do it. Put Windows in, everything worked fine. Great. So I took it back home, kept crashing again, and then Steve Whip says, got a bad motherboard video card. So I kept thinking, what the hell is it? And it was intermittent. Sometimes it would run fine. Sometimes it would run fine for a while. And then sometimes it wouldn't run at all. And I'd taken the box back to this guy twice. I forget what the first time was. I got it back home the second time, and it's running okay. Phil and I are out there fooling around for, an hour and a half, and it crashed once, and I'm thinking, something's wrong. I just don't trust it, but something's wrong. And then I kept going with it. It kept getting worse and worse and worse. And finally, in a fit of desperation, I just said, all right, what is the best hardware analysis tool out there for the PC? And that's not the question I should have asked. I should have asked, what is the most user-friendly best hardware analysis tool? Because this thing had all these benchmarks, and it measured everything. And I was just about to give up on it, so I don't understand any of this stuff. And then I hit the button that said sensors, and that came up with a real simple set of bar charts. And my GPU is running at 36 degrees centigrade, the graphics card. And my CPU had been running at 88 degrees centigrade for 3 hours. And all 4 cores were at 84, 85 degrees centigrade. But the CPU was 88 centigrade for the duration. And that's a bit hot. The wonderful thing about having access to the world's information is, I said, does 88 degrees centigrade temperature in a CPU cause game crashes? And it basically said your CPU should normally be functioning at around 65 degrees. 40 to 65 degrees C is good. It can spike into the 80s occasionally, but anything that's consistently above 80 is problematic. And 88 is above 80. So I am going to take the thing in, and 5 of the smart people here already have said, check the paste. So it was working, and suddenly it wasn't working. So I know that the system came with enough coolant to keep the system CPU cool enough to operate. Something happened. I can constantly hear the fan accelerating when the CPU gets under load. That's relatively normal, but what I found out from the research was it is most likely, and the reason I'm saying this is going to pack the thing up right now. It's in my car. I'm going to drive it over to this guy's house right this second at 9:15 p.m. on Friday night. I'm going to take it over, and I'm hoping that it is either the fan is not correctly seated, but what most people think it is that it is the thermal paste that actually connects the top of the CPU to the heatsink, and the heatsink is attached to the fan. Sadwing says I need liquid cooling on that. I could have gotten liquid cooling, but I had liquid cooling on a previous computer, and the thing was so bloody heavy, I just said it's not worth it. It was one of these things at ASUS, you just assemble your own machine, and if you made a mistake that wouldn't work, it would just say this is not allowed, so I kept it air-cooled. So in any event, I'm going to take it over now. We're going to pull the fan off. We're going to take a look at the whether the thermal paste has had any cracks or is in contact with the heat sink, and if the fan is working. And if it turns out that all of those things are good, and I suspect they're not because it did work for a while, if they're not working, then I'm going to have to get a beefier cooling system. But I'm hoping it's something real simple, like either the heat sink's not fully seated on the back of the processor, or maybe the fan's dead or whatever. But in any event, this thing has been bugging the living daylights out of me for months. I hadn't had a chance to fly DCS with Phil since August. And I could use a little recreation, so we'll see. In any event, that was that. So that will do it for this. Well, I've been here for what? Almost 3 hours. It feels like it was 3 hours, and there was one sentence. Just one sentence for 3 hours, but in any event. So thanks for joining us, and thanks for putting up with this and the great feedback as always, and all the rest of it. Steve Whoop says, Asus Repair is in Temple. Maybe that's Tempe. My old hometown. Burn it now. Well, we'll see. Yeah, Eclipse in Enos, Texas. By the way, somebody mentioned this last time. Maybe we can do a Strateclipse kind of thing. There's still some time. I need to check with some friends about where they're going to go, but it'd be nice if we all were on the same spot there. So we'll see. Eric said, the exact same problem was in college when we learned that it was constantly overheating. We discovered it was because of a dust ball got stuck in the fan. Well, I will have a stern discussion with the fan, and I will send a harshly worded letter to ASUS customer service, which I have no doubt will cause computer technicians to parachute in out of the sky the same way as if I was asking for my lawyer at a traffic stop. This show is made possible by the members at BillWhittle.com, who've been nothing but generous and patient with us is everlasting. We do have a website that actually takes memberships now, so now I can start producing some of the content that I thought I'd be producing 3 months ago, but nevertheless, here it is. We're going to get set up for the story mechanics thing. I very, very, very much hope and expect to get John Voight done before Christmas, so that's what I'm going to be doing this weekend and during the week, is getting that particular setup done. And I think this things to come thing is going to be quite a corker, so we'll see. All right, that'll do it. Thanks again for everybody. Thanks for being here, and And if you're a member, thanks for the support. If you're not a member, thanks for looking at all the people who are supporting us during this crazy crazy time. And why don't we just say goodbye to YouTube first this time? YouTube, it's good talking to you. 121 viewers. That's non-chicken feed live. So it's great to talk to all of you. Thanks for being here. And at this point, YouTube, we are going to say goodnight to you and probably see you Monday for the Stratosphere Studio. So long.